Hey guys, tonight we begin with the brutally austere, lonely and self-denying life of a man who quite literally preserved the medieval world. The monk. You've probably seen them in movies, those tonsured men in brown robes, heads bowed in prayer as candlelight flickers across ancient stone walls. But trust me, being a real medieval monk was nothing like those serene contemplative montages. It was cold, exhausting, hunger-inducing work, and in most cases, it absolutely sucked. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You were born into a family with too many mouths and too little bread. No crowns, no land, no fancy titles, just desperate parents and a vague hope that sending one child to God might bring blessings to the rest. From the moment you could walk without guidance from your mother, you were marked for a different path. By age 6, you were officially handed over to the monastery, which is a polite medieval way of saying your childhood was over. Your toys, a prayer book, your playground, the cold stone floor of a chapel, your playmates, silence and discipline. The day you arrived, they shaved your head in the distinctive tonsure, that bizarre bowl cut that left a ring of hair around a bald crown, stripping away your identity along with your locks. They dressed you in rough wool that scratched your skin raw. This wasn't a costume, it was your new skin. Your old name? Forgotten. Now you were Brother something or other, named for a saint you'd spend your life trying to emulate. Your teacher, the novice master, was a terrifying figure whose entire vocabulary consisted of stern corrections, Latin verses, and the phrase "again from the beginning." He had hands like parchment and a permanent scowl etched from decades of pre-dawn prayers and self-denial. He taught you everything: how to pray without ceasing, how to copy manuscripts without errors, how to ignore the gnawing pain in your empty stomach. You didn't ask questions, you just observed, absorbed and obeyed. Mostly because asking questions often resulted in extra penances and a week of cleaning the latrines. Holidays, nice idea. You don't get those. The monastery doesn't take breaks, and neither do you. Someone always needs to pray, copy manuscripts, or tend to the endless chores. You learn quickly that free time is just the time between one prayer service and the next. And while you're technically learning sacred wisdom, what you're really learning is pain tolerance, sleep deprivation, and how to fall asleep standing up during matins. By the time you're 10, you already smell like old parchment, can recite the Psalms by heart, and have arms strong enough to ring bells that weigh more than you do, assuming the bells didn't wake you from your precious 3 hours of sleep 5 years ago. This is your life now. Welcome to God's service. Hope you like chanting, silence, and 70 years of back pain. If you thought you'd get a few good years of childhood before the monastic hammer came down, think again. Youth in the medieval monastery is more of a technicality than a phase. The moment you can hold a quill without toppling over, you're drafted. Forget games, toys, or any concept of fun. Your playroom is a stone-cold chapel filled with stern-faced men and Latin chants. Your jungle gym, the wooden choir stalls where you'll stand for 8 hours of daily prayer. Your official job title might be novice, but what it really means is do everything no one else wants to do and get disciplined anyway. You stoke the chapel fires, light the candles, sweep the stone floors, wash the dishes, copy the boring parts of manuscripts, and try not to fall asleep during pre-dawn prayers. All before breaking your fast with a piece of stale bread you get paid in spiritual merit, stern nods, and the occasional grunt of mild approval, which in monastic language means you blasphemed slightly less today. Meanwhile, the village children you once knew are out in the fields, maybe throwing sticks or learning practical trades. You envy them, even though they might grow up to be farmers or blacksmiths. Humble jobs, sure, but ones that involve fewer midnight wake-ups and more than one meal a day. You, on the other hand, are learning to memorize entire books of the Bible in Latin, a language you barely understand but must recite perfectly, or face Brother Anselm's disciplinary rod across your knuckles. If you're lucky, your monastery follows the relatively merciful Benedictine rule. If you're unlucky, you've landed with the Cistercians or, God forbid, the Carthusians, where even the minor comforts of occasional meat and warm sleeping quarters are considered sinful luxuries. And don't even think about saying, "I'm tired." That phrase doesn't exist in the monastery. Fatigue is spiritual weakness. Exhaustion is for the uncommit. You keep praying, keep working, keep silent, or at least keep from crying where anyone can see. Because in the eyes of your abbot, who might be kind but is more likely to be a man who thinks comfort breeds sin, you're not a child anymore. You're a small monk in training. And the training never ends. The monastery isn't just where you work. It's your entire existence. It dominates your senses, reshapes your body, and rewires your soul. By the time you're in your teens, it doesn't just feel like a place. It feels like a living entity, a cold, austere, demanding creature that must be fed with prayer, obedience, and self-denial. You know the sounds by heart, the bells marking each hour of prayer, the shuffling feet on stone floors, the monotone chanting that becomes the soundtrack of your existence. There's a rhythm to it, like some solemn medieval symphony, and your body moves in time with it, whether you're awake or half asleep. You stop noticing the cold after a while. That's not because it gets easier, it's because you've simply accepted it. Like gravity or hunger, it becomes your constant companion. You know which stones in the chapel freeze your knees the quickest, which corridors have the worst drafts, and which spots in the dormitory are furthest from the single pathetic foe that barely warms the room. Your clothes, the same rough woolen habit and scratchy undergarments you wear every day, smell like a mix of sweat, incense, and desperation. You own nothing, not even the robe on your back, which belongs to the monastery, just like you do. You start to forget what normal conversation sounds like. The ritual responses, the scripture readings, the limited approved phrases in sign language, these become your only forms of communication. When the monastery does allow speaking, perhaps during the afternoon work period, it feels almost unsettling. You find yourself uncomfortable with casual talk, struggling to remember how people normally converse. Your vocabulary shrinks to prayers, psalms, and work instructions. Your friends, assuming you've kept any, barely exist. Brotherhood in Christ doesn't mean friendship as the outside world knows it. It means shared suffering, shared silence, shared purpose. But personal bonds are discouraged as particular friendships that might distract from your devotion to God. You're not Brother Thomas. You're just another faceless monk in an identical robe, interchangeable and anonymous. And strangely, a part of you starts to accept this. Not the hunger, not the cold, but the sense of purpose. When the illuminated manuscript finally comes out right, when your voice blends perfectly into the choir, when the brief moment of silence after Compline feels almost like peace. For a moment, you're not just a kid trapped in a stone prison of prayer. You're part of something ancient and eternal, a necessary thread in the spiritual fabric. Then the moment passes, the bell tolls again, and it's time for matins. Back to prayer, back to work, back to the endless cycle that will consume your entire life. By the time your former friends are starting to grow into their teenage frames, learning trades or preparing for marriage, your body already feels ancient. While they're getting taller and stronger, you're getting pale, thin, and prematurely aged. Your back, permanently stooped from hours of praying, bowing, and manuscript copying. Your knees, calloused from stone floors. Your hands, ink-stained and cramped from holding quills. Your voice, hoarse from endless chanting. Your schedule is a masterpiece of sacred torture designed to minimize sleep and maximize devotion. The monastery day begins when most people are deep in dreams, around 200 km for matins, the night office. You stagger from your straw mattress in the pitch-black dormitory, guided only by habit and fear of punishment for lateness. The stone floor numbs your bare feet as you shuffle to your assigned spot in the choir, where you'll stand and chant for up to 2 hours. There's no returning to bed after matins. By 6:00 a.m, the bell rings for prime, followed by a chapter meeting where public confessions and floggings create the perfect start to the day. Then comes mass, then terce at 9:00 a.m, then work until sext at noon. A brief silent meal breaks the day, your main sustenance of bread, pottage, perhaps beans or peas if it's not a fast day. Then back to labour until none at 3:00 p.m, followed by more work, vespers at sunset, a light collation, which isn't even a proper meal, compline, and finally bed around 8 p.m, only to do it all again in just 6 hours. Fast days punctuate this already brutal schedule. Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year, the entirety of Advent, all 40 days of Lent, and various saints' vigils. On these days, your single meal shrinks to nearly nothing, while the physical labour and prayer demands remain unchanged. Your body becomes accustomed to operating on minimal fuel, perpetual fatigue, and the strange lightheadedness that accompanies chronic caloric deficit. Yet the most insidious part of monastic life isn't the obvious deprivation, It's the relentless erosion of your identity. Your name is gone, replaced by a religious one. Your hair is gone, replaced by the tonsure. Your clothes, your possessions, your family ties, your future choices, all gone. Even your voice becomes not your own, but merely a vessel for prescribed prayers and responses. The monastery doesn't just want your obedience, it wants your self-erasure. You learn to survive by finding tiny freedoms where you can. A moment of genuine prayer when the formal office ends, a secret glance at a forbidden manuscript in the library, a brief exchange of real human connection disguised as work discussion. These small rebellions keep you sane in a system designed to remake you into something otherworldly, neither fully alive in this world nor yet departed to the next. Your day doesn't begin, it never ended. The monastery operates 24 hours, and you're just a cog in the perpetual prayer machine. When most people are deep in dreams, you're stumbling through dark hallways guided only by muscle memory and the fear of punishment for tardiness. Welcome to the brutal rhythm of monastic time, where sleep is a sin and rest is for the weak. It starts with matins, the night office. The bell rings at 2 a.m., a harsh clanging that tears through whatever pitiful sleep you've managed to grab. You have minutes to rise from your straw mattress, pull on your sandals, and find your place in the choir before the first psalm begins. In winter, this means leaving the relative warmth of your blanket for stone floors so cold they burn your feet. In summer, it means peeling your sweat-soaked habit off the straw and staggering upright, still half-conscious. The church is dark, lit only by a few candles that cast more shadows than light. You find your assigned spot by memory, standing shoulder to shoulder with brothers whose faces you can barely see. Then it begins, up to 2 hours of chanting, reciting and reading scripture, all from memory because there's not enough light to read by. Your voice joins the monotone drone, words you've repeated so many times they've lost all meaning. Just sounds now, rising from your throat while your mind floats somewhere between wakefulness and dreams. But don't you dare doze off. The circulating monk, an older brother assigned to keep everyone awake, moves silently through the choir stalls with a wooden stick. Nodding heads receive a sharp tap on the skull. Repeated offences earn you public humiliation at the chapter meeting, where you'll kneel before the entire community and beg forgiveness for your weakness. Matins finally ends, but there's no returning to bed. Some monasteries permit a brief rest before Lauds at dawn, but many don't. Instead, you might sit in the cloister and meditate, or begin early morning tasks in the bakery or kitchen. The eastern sky barely shows the first hint of light when the bell rings again for Lauds, calling you back to the church to greet the day with more psalms, more chanting, more standing on legs already aching from matins. The morning proceeds in a merciless march of prayer services. Prime at 6 a.m, followed by the daily chapter meeting where public confessions, announcements, and discipline create the perfect start to your day. Nothing builds community like watching a brother get flogged for talking during great silence or failing to bow properly during the Gloria. After chapter comes Mass, then terce at 9 a.m, punctuating the morning like clockwork torture. Between these services, there's work, endless back-breaking labour in the fields, workshops, kitchens, or scriptorium. The rule of St. Benedict commands that idleness is the enemy of the soul, so your hands are never empty, your back never straight, your brow never dry. You haul stones for building projects, dig irrigation ditches, copy manuscripts until your fingers cramp, all while trying to maintain a prayerful mindset because your work is supposed to be an extension of your worship. Sext arrives at noon, another dash to the church, another hour of standing and chanting before your one real meal of the day, if you can call it that. You sit on a bench in the refectory, listening to a brother read scripture while you consume whatever plain, meatless fare the monastery can provide. No talking, no seconds, no complaining about the watery pottage and rock-hard bread. Just eat what you're given and be grateful, sinner. The afternoon brings none at 3 p.m, breaking up whatever task you've been assigned. More psalms, more standing, more monotony. Then back to work until Vespers at sunset, the evening service that closes the workday but not your obligations. A light collation might follow, barely enough food to call a snack, before Compline, the final office, which sends you to bed with prayers for protection during the night. Sleep at last? Not so fast. The great silence begins after Compline, a sacred quiet that blankets the monastery until morning. No talking, no noise, not even sign language is permitted now. You shuffle to the dormitory, find your hard bed among dozens of identical ones, and collapse onto it still wearing your habit because the night is cold and the blanket is thin. You'll get about 6 hours of sleep before the bell rings for matins, and the whole cycle starts again. Don't forget the special variations that make this schedule even more delightful. Fast days punctuate the calendar, Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year, the entirety of Advent, all 40 days of Lent, and various saints' vigils. On these days, your single meal shrinks to nearly nothing, while the physical labour and prayer demands remain unchanged. Your body becomes intimately familiar with the light-headed sensation of operating on minimal calories and maximal exertion. Then there are feast days with extended services that add hours to your already punishing schedule. The Triduum before Easter is particularly brutal. Holy Thursday, Good Friday and Holy Saturday feature marathon prayer sessions, complex rituals, and almost no sleep. By Easter morning, you're hallucinating from exhaustion, seeing saints in the shadows and demons in the corners, but still expected to chant with proper devotion. Weather doesn't modify the schedule. Snow, ice, flooding. The bell rings regardless, and you answer its call. Summer heat turns the church into a stone oven where the smell of unwashed bodies and heavy woolen habits creates a miasma thick enough to chew. Winter cold transforms it into a torture chamber where breath freezes in the air and fingers become too numb to turn prayer book pages. But the psalms must be sung, the hours must be kept, the rhythm must continue without interruption. The most insidious part of this schedule isn't the lack of sleep or the physical demands. It's the way it reshapes your perception of time itself. Days blur into weeks, weeks into years. You begin to measure your life not in memories or achievements, but in liturgical cycles. Was it 2 Advents ago, or 3 when Brother Michael died? Did the roof collapse before or after the Feast of Saint? Benedict. Your entire existence becomes indexed to a calendar of saints and seasons, repeated endlessly until you lose all sense of linear progression. Your body adapts, sort of. You learn to micronap while standing, to recite prayers automatically while your consciousness hovers somewhere else. You develop the ability to function on minimal sleep, though function might be a generous term for your shuffling, hollow-eyed state. What doesn't adapt is your resentment, carefully hidden but always simmering, at the relentless toll of bells that own your every waking and sleeping moment. Even your dreams, when you're allowed to have them, revolve around the schedule. You dream of missing matins and being disciplined. You dream of endless corridors leading to a church service you can never quite reach. You dream of psalms that loop and repeat until you wake up still reciting them. Sleep brings no escape because the monastery has colonized even your unconscious mind. The schedule doesn't just structure your day, it breaks your will. That's its purpose. Individual desire, personal preference, human weakness, all must be subordinated to the communal rhythm. Your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the bells. Your time isn't yours, it's God's. Your energy, your attention, your very consciousness, all requisitioned in service to an unending cycle of prayer. You pray when tired, you pray when hungry, you pray when sick. Prayer isn't a choice, it's the air you breathe. Only it's not air, it's water, and you're drowning in it day after day, night after night, service after service, until the words lose meaning and the rituals become mechanical. Until you can perform the entire divine office in your sleep, which is convenient because sometimes you actually are asleep, standing upright in your choir stall, mouth moving automatically, body present but mind long gone. This is your life now. Bells and psalms and work and hunger and cold and exhaustion forever, or at least until death mercifully releases you from your vows. But don't worry, the monastery assures you that this suffering is purifying your soul. Every missed hour of sleep, every growl of your empty stomach, every shiver in the pre-dawn darkness, all are spiritual treasures being stored up in heaven. Small comfort when you're fighting to keep your eyes open during the 3rd hour of a night vigil, wondering if anyone would notice if you simply keeled over and died on the spot. They'd probably just prop you up and continue chanting. The divine office waits for no man, not even a corpse. Silence isn't just a rule, it's a way of life. In many monasteries, talking is completely forbidden except for prayers. No chatting, no joking, no complaining. You start to forget what your own voice sounds like. Days blending into weeks of nothing but ritualistic Latin chants and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement from an elder monk. Your own thoughts grow deafening inside your skull with no outlet, no release. Let's talk punishments, because God forbid you slip up and whisper a word to the brother beside you. Remember those kneeling sessions on stone we covered earlier? They're just the beginning. For breaking silence, you might find yourself prostrate at the monastery entrance, where every single brother must step over you on their way to services. Or maybe you'll enjoy the special privilege of eating alone on the floor while everyone watches from their benches, your crime announced to all before the meal. Some monasteries get creative. Perhaps you'll wear a wooden gag, a literal tongue restraint for hours or days. Fancy a meal? Too bad. Your punishment might be bread and water for a week while you contemplate your sinful tongue. The Cistercians, those cheerful fellows, have particularly strict silence rules. You're not even allowed to gesture unnecessarily. Every movement, every glance becomes calculated, restrained, imprisoned. The Carthusians take it further. You get your own isolated cell where you pray, work, and eat alone. You might see your brothers only during church services, passing like silent ghosts in the corridors, eyes downcast, souls contained. That's why monastery sign language develops, not for rich conversation, but for bare necessities. Need bread? There's a sign for that, mimicking slicing with your hands. Wine for communion? Circle your finger like you're tracing the rim of a cup. You learn dozens of utilitarian gestures, for tools, for prayer books, for reporting illness. But notice what's missing. No sign for "I miss my family", no gesture for "I had a beautiful dream". No movement of the hands that means I'm slowly losing my mind in this silence. You could live for decades beside a fellow monk without knowing he once had a sister, or liked the colour green, or was afraid of mice. You know Brother Thomas has a persistent cough that worsens in winter. You know Brother Richard's handwriting slants slightly to the left. You know Brother Martin always takes exactly 3 sips when drinking. These tiny observations become your entire social world, meaningless details magnified by isolation, scrutinized in the vacuum of your mind. The loneliness isn't relieved by the constant presence of others. That's the cruel paradox. You're surrounded by men, sleeping in the same dormitory, praying in the same church, working in the same fields, yet you're utterly, completely alone, more alone than any hermit in a cave, because at least the hermit can talk to himself without fear of punishment. You, on the other hand, must maintain perfect composure while drowning in unspoken words. The psychological impact is immense. First comes the internalization, all those unused words piling up inside you like dry kindling. Then the obsessive thoughts begin. Without external conversation to interrupt your mental patterns, ideas circle endlessly. A small theological question becomes an all-consuming fixation. A minor slight from another brother, perhaps he took the last of the lamp oil, grows into an imagined nemesis. You create elaborate dialogues in your head, arguments and reconciliations that never happen in reality. Imagine standing in the freezing church at 2 a.m. during what's called the Great Silence, the deepest hours of night when even the minimal communication allowed during day hours is absolutely forbidden. Your breath visible in the cold, your feet numb on stone, and your mind screaming inside its prison of bone, desperate for even the smallest human connection. The silence isn't peaceful. It's a weight pressing down, a presence filling every corner of the monastery. It follows you into your dreams. Your facial expressions begin to change after years of this. The muscles used for speaking, for smiling, for normal human interaction gradually atrophy. You develop what other monks call the monastery face, a blank, unreadable mask. Emotions turned inward where they burn like acid. Your movements become measured, minimized, your body learning that expression itself is dangerous. Some brothers develop tics, a twitching eyelid, a constantly moving finger. Small rebellions of the flesh against unnatural constraint. Sometimes, and this is the worst part, you begin to hate the sound of human speaking. On the rare occasions when silence is broken, a visiting dignitary, a special feast day with limited conversation allowed, you find the noise grating, overwhelming. Your brain has rewired itself. What was once natural now feels foreign, even painful. You have become a creature of silence, twisted by its demands. The only outlet for many monks is writing, if you're one of the lucky ones assigned to the scriptorium. At least there you can copy texts, form letters, create something. Even if they're not your words, even if it's just a gospel you've copied 100 times, at least it's communication of some kind. Some brothers find small ways to rebel, tiny doodles in manuscript margins, a slightly decorative initial letter, a hidden face in an illuminated border. These microscopic expressions of selfhood are spiritual lifelines. Winter is worst for silence. Confined indoors by snow and bitter cold, unable to work the fields or walk the grounds, The monks are packed together in the limited heated spaces, the silence thicker, more suffocating. At least in summer you can weed the garden alone, find a moment of solitude that feels chosen rather than imposed, hear birds and insects that break the unnatural quiet with their unconcerned songs. And yet rarely, so rarely you can count the occasions on one hand across decades, there are moments when the silence transcends its punishment. Perhaps during a dawn service when the first light streams through the eastern windows, painting the church in gold and rose and the brothers stand perfectly still between prayers. Or at dusk, when the entire monastery seems to exhale after a day of labour, and for just a heartbeat the silence feels holy rather than horrible. These moments sustain you, small tastes of what the silence is supposedly for, communion with God when all human voices cease. But these moments pass quickly, and the oppressive reality returns. The silence isn't really about spiritual elevation, it's about control, about breaking individuals and forming a collective that responds to the smallest gesture from the abbot, that doesn't question, doesn't complain, doesn't connect except through approved channels. It's an institutional tool cloaked in spiritual language. You've learned to live without your voice, without personal connection, without the basic human comfort of unburdened speech. Just as your hands have hardened from labour, your mind has developed calluses from silence. You no longer expect to be heard or known. Like the stone walls of the monastery itself, you've become a closed thing, containing rather than expressing. The silence has won. And in winning, it has taken something from you that can never be restored, even if someday someone were to give you permission to speak again. Your bedroom, if you can call it that, is a dormitory, a cold communal sleeping hall with wooden beds hard as stone. No soft mattress, just straw, no warm blankets, just a coarse cloth. And your pillow? A block of wood, literally, a chunk of timber with maybe a slight curve carved into it. Good luck finding a comfortable position on that. You'll spend decades with a permanent crick in your neck, a souvenir of your spiritual devotion. This wooden headrest isn't a budget issue, it's intentional. Comfort is seen as dangerously close to luxury, which leads to sin, which leads to hell. So congratulations, your painful pillow is actually saving your eternal soul. At least that's what the abbot says during one of those rare moments when the silence is broken for instruction. You sleep fully clothed even in your sandals. The Benedictine rule specifically forbids removing them. Why? Because you might need to rush to prayers at a moment's notice. The divine office waits for no one, not even a monk fumbling for his footwear at 2 a.m. Your scratchy wool robe becomes your blanket, your mattress cover, and probably your shroud someday. You wear it until it falls apart, sleep in it, sweat in it, work in it. The wool retains every odour, every stain, a textile record of your monastic journey. The dormitory has no heat, none at all. In winter, your breath forms clouds above your bed. Sometimes you wake to find a thin layer of frost on your blanket where your exhaled moisture froze in the night. Your fingers are too numb to grip your prayer book until you've been awake for an hour. Some brothers never warm up from November to March, existing in a state of perpetual shivering. The stone walls, so effective at keeping the summer heat out, become brutal allies of winter, radiating cold like they're being paid to do it. During summer, the pendulum swings, the dormitory becomes an oven. With small windows that barely open, dozens of men packed together, and woolen robes you're not allowed to remove, the heat is suffocating. You sweat through your bedding, through your clothes, creating a humidity that turns the room into a sauna without the health benefits. The air becomes thick, almost solid, with the combined breath and body odour of the entire community. And remember that silence we talked about. It extends to complaints about temperature. Freezing or roasting, you bear it in the same quiet suffering. Privacy doesn't exist, not anywhere, not ever. The dormitory beds are arranged side by side with barely enough space to kneel between them for your private prayers, which aren't private at all because everyone can see you. The older monasteries don't even have beds separated by dividers. It's just one long room with a row of monks laid out like herring in a barrel. Later reforms might grant you the luxury of a small cubicle or a cloth partition if you're lucky. Even your bodily functions are communal affairs. The latrine is a row of holes cut into a stone bench all in one room. No dividers, no privacy. Constipated? Everyone knows. Diarrhea from the questionable monastery fish? That's now public knowledge. You sit shoulder to shoulder with your brothers in Christ, united in the most base of human needs. And of course talking is forbidden here too, though the sounds and smells communicate more than words ever could. Bathing happens in the same collective fashion, though far less frequently than toilet visits. Once a month is common, with whole groups of monks taking turns in the bathhouse, if your monastery is wealthy enough to have one. Otherwise, it's a quick splash in a basin of cold water, scrubbing with rough soap that smells strongly of lye and does little for the ingrained dirt of farm work or manuscript copying. Many brothers view bathing with suspicion anyway. Too much cleanliness shows vanity and worldliness. Light is a luxury you rarely enjoy. Candles and lamp oil are expensive. After dark, which comes early inside thick stone walls, you navigate by memory and moonlight filtering through tiny windows. Tripping over steps, bumping into corners, and stepping on your brother's feet become nightly rituals. During winter, when darkness claims 16 hours of the day, you might go weeks barely seeing anything clearly. Your eyes adapt, developing what brothers call monastery night vision, the ability to sense shapes in almost total darkness. The monastery's dampness is a living presence. It creeps into your bones, into your chest, forming the persistent cough that almost all monks develop eventually. Stone walls weep moisture during temperature changes. Underground storage rooms grow thick black mould that no amount of scrubbing eliminates. Your manuscript pages curl in the humidity, your sandals never quite dry out, and your robe carries a perpetual musty smell that becomes part of your identity. Pests are your constant companions. Mice scamper boldly across the dormitory floor, occasionally running across your face while you sleep. Rats claim the food storage areas as their domain, taking a tithe from the monastery's already meagre supplies. Lice and fleas live in your bedding, your clothing, your hair, what's left of it after tonsure. You stop noticing the constant itching after the first few years. It becomes background noise to your existence, like the silence or the cold. Depending on your monastery's location, there might be larger unwelcome visitors. Monasteries built in former wilderness areas contend with wolves howling outside the walls, bears breaking into beehives, and wild boars destroying carefully tended gardens. Remote island monasteries face seagulls that dive-bomb any uncovered food and steal anything small and shiny, including prayer book clasps and ritual items. You own nothing. This isn't a metaphor or an exaggeration. You possess absolutely nothing. Not the robe on your back, not the sandals on your feet, not even the crude wooden spoon you eat with. Everything belongs to the monastery collectively. The rule of St. Benedict is crystal clear. Private ownership is forbidden as a grave evil, a threat to community life. Find a pretty rock on your walk? Not yours. Whittle a small wooden cross during rare moments of free time? Not yours. A family member somehow gets a message to you with a small keepsake? Definitely not yours. It goes straight to the common storage or the abbot's disposal. This total poverty extends to your time, your talents, your ideas. Write a beautiful hymn? It belongs to the monastery. Develop a more efficient way to harvest the vegetable garden? That's not your personal innovation. It's a gift from God to the community. Nothing you create, think, or do belongs to you. You have surrendered ownership of not just material things, but your very identity. The few small comforts that exist are communal. The warming room, the single heated chamber where elderly and sick brothers are sometimes permitted to thaw frozen hands on the coldest days. The occasional sweetened bread on a major feast day. The slightly softer chair in the corner of the scriptorium that brothers silently compete for through early arrival. Your bed isn't assigned permanently. In many monasteries, sleeping spots rotate to prevent attachment to any physical space or the development of casual friendships with the same neighbours. Just as you begin to recognise Brother Jerome's particular snoring pattern or learn to sleep through Brother Michael's night terrors, you're moved to a different spot between strangers once again. The constant grinding discomfort isn't accidental, it's the point. Every hard surface, every cold corner, every shared bodily function is a reminder that comfort belongs to the next world, not this one. Your body isn't being punished, it's being trained, like breaking a horse to saddle. Physical hardship is spiritualized, discomfort made holy, deprivation turned into virtue. And as the days blur into years, you stop noticing most of it just as you've stopped hearing the silence. Your standards shift so dramatically that a slightly less damp corner of the dormitory feels like luxury fit for a king. Eating in the monastery isn't for enjoyment, it's minimum fuel to keep the body functioning. You eat to live, not live to eat, and even live is too strong a word. Subsist might be better. Endure. Remember all those discomforts of your sleeping quarters. Consider your stomach equally maltreated, though with holy purpose, of course. Your diet is dictated by the rule, and by ancient traditions of self-denial. For Benedictines, meat from four-legged animals is forbidden entirely, unless you're deathly ill, at which point you might get a sliver of pork fat that does nothing to cure you but reminds you what you've been missing. Stricter orders like the Cistercians and Carthusians forbid all animal products. No meat, no eggs, no milk, no cheese. Just plants, grains, and the occasional fish if your monastery happens to sit near water. The common meal is simple. A hunk of dark, coarse bread that could double as building material if the monastery walls ever needed repair. It's dense, barely leavened, full of grit from stone-ground flour. Your teeth wear down year after year, not from eating too many sweets, but from grinding through this daily bread. If your monastery follows the continental tradition, maybe you get a small cup of watered-down wine, not for pleasure, but because the local water might kill you faster than starvation. Pottage is your constant companion, a thin gruel of whatever vegetables are in season, boiled to shapeless submission in a large communal pot. In spring, it's mostly green herbs and early peas. Summer brings more variety with beans, cabbage, and turnips. Fall pottage might contain apples, onions, and roots. Winter pottage, well, that's whatever root vegetables haven't rotted in storage, often with the distinct flavour of mould that brothers pretend not to notice. If your monastery is near the coast, you might get small dried fish mixed into your bowl, tails and heads included. Protein is protein, after all. Unlike the lords in their castles or even peasants in their homes, you don't get multiple courses or meals. The single main meal happens at midday, precisely at the same time every day, regardless of seasonal workload. Some orders permit a light evening meal called a collation, a few nuts, perhaps as a piece of fruit, maybe a thin slice of bread if it's not a fasting day. And speaking of fasting days, fasting isn't occasional in monastic life, it's a lifestyle. Every Friday is a fast day commemorating Christ's death. So is every Wednesday in many orders. The 40 days of Lent bring intensified hunger, with some monasteries limiting brothers to a single small meal after sunset. Advent brings another extended fast. Various saints' vigils require abstention. Add them all up, and you're fasting for nearly half the year. During these fasts, your already meagre portions shrink further. Your small cup of diluted wine disappears entirely. The thin pottage becomes thinner, served in smaller bowls. Your chunk of daily bread might be reduced by a third. The more zealous brothers compete to eat less than the rule requires, leaving food on their plates as displays of superior devotion. The abbot watches, nodding with approval at these exhibitions of self-denial. You eat this minimal meal in silence, of course, no conversation to distract from the spiritual practice of bland consumption. Instead, one brother reads scripture or lives of the saints from a raised pulpit while you chew. You must pay attention to the reading, as the abbot might quiz you later, but your empty stomach growls loud enough to drown out every third word. The refectory, your dining hall, isn't heated any better than the dormitory we explored earlier. In winter, your pottage cools to an unappetizing lukewarm slop before you've taken 3 spoonfuls. In summer, flies compete for your meal, landing on your bread, drowning themselves in your cup. You brush them aside without comment. Extra protein. While noble households and even peasant families might season their food with herbs and imported spices, your meals are deliberately bland. Flavour might lead to gluttony, which leads to lust, which leads to damnation. The correlation between salt and hellfire isn't obvious, but the monastery takes no chances. Food isn't for pleasure, it's fuel, medicine, necessity, nothing more. For the young oblates, those boys we mentioned earlier, donated to the monastery by their families, this dietary austerity hits particularly hard. Growing children need more food than adults, but they receive the same portions as the elderly monks. Their bodies never quite develop properly, remaining stunted, their growth permanently altered by years of nutritional deprivation. This physical stunting is considered a small price for spiritual growth. The physical effects of this diet accumulate slowly. Your skin takes on a greyish cast from lack of certain nutrients. Your gums bleed easily, teeth loosen. In winter, when fresh produce disappears entirely, brothers develop night blindness from vitamin deficiencies. Hair thins, not just from your tonsure but from malnourishment. Wounds heal slowly. Minor cuts from garden tools or kitchen knives linger for weeks. Digestive problems become chronic companions. Constipation from the heavy, fibre-rich bread alternates with diarrhea from spoiled food or contaminated water. The communal latrine, remember that room of stone toilet seats we toured earlier, witnesses the collective suffering of monastic digestion. Brothers develop a silent camaraderie in this shared misery, exchanging knowing glances when someone hurries urgently toward the necessarium in the middle of the night. Special feast days, Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, your monastery's patron saint's day, bring slightly improved fare, perhaps a piece of fish for each brother instead of just fish broth. Maybe honey drizzled on your bread, possibly an egg if your order permits it. These momentary indulgences make the return to normal austerity even more difficult, reminding your taste buds of what they're missing the other 360 days a year. The only monks who escape this dietary regime are those working in the monastery's hospitality services. When important visitors arrive, bishops, nobles, wealthy pilgrims, the guest quarters served proper meals with meat, wine, and multiple courses. The brothers assigned to serve these guests often secretly consume leftovers, a sin confessed in whispers during weekly chapter meetings. The punishment? Additional fasting, of course. If your monastery follows the tradition of the Desert Fathers who established monastic life, water is rationed too, not just during fasts but year-round. Your daily allotment barely slakes your thirst, leaving you in perpetual mild dehydration. This practice has theological roots. The desert ascetics believed thirst brought one closer to spiritual enlightenment, referencing Christ's suffering on the cross when he said, "I thirst." Your constant dry mouth becomes a form of ongoing devotion. Food preparation happens in rotating shifts. Brothers serve weekly turns in the kitchen, rising even earlier than the 2 a.m. matins call to start fires and prepare the day's bread. Kitchen work is simultaneously coveted and dreaded. Coveted because proximity to food means occasional secret nibbles. Dreaded because the heat, smoke, and heavy lifting make it the monastery's most physically demanding indoor task. The one exception to culinary austerity might be beer brewing. Many monasteries produce their own beer, technically as a saleable product and for hospitality purposes, but it also provides essential calories and nutrients to the brothers, in a form that doesn't explicitly violate the rule's restrictions. The brewing brothers tend to be slightly plumper than their peers, with ruddier complexions, mysterious blessings from God, no doubt. The most perverse aspect of this dietary regimen? You eventually take pride in it. You compare your self-denial to the gluttony of the outside world and feel superior. You learn to interpret your stomach's growling as the voice of virtue. Your lightheadedness during long prayer services becomes a signal that you're ascending toward heaven, untethered from bodily needs. Hunger becomes identity. Deprivation becomes accomplishment. Empty becomes holy. Ora et labora sunt prayer and lero. That's not just a motto, it's your entire life. When you're not praying, you're working. When you're not working, you're praying. Your silence has purpose now, productive purpose. Because idle hands are the devil's workshop, and you better believe your abbot won't tolerate a single moment of rest. The monastery isn't a place of contemplation and gentle scholarship. It's a small, self-sufficient kingdom with endless physical demands. Fields don't plough themselves, stone walls don't repair themselves, bread doesn't bake itself, and since hiring outside help would contaminate your sacred space with worldly influence, guess who gets to do it all? You and your brothers, with your soft oblate hands that haven't yet hardened into the callous tools they'll become. You're assigned labour based on skill, strength, and sometimes as punishment. The weakest and oldest often work in the gardens, bent over root vegetables in the same posture they assume for prayer. Your back aches either way. The stronger monks handle construction and repair when hauling stones, mixing mortar, replacing rotted beams. And if you're unlucky enough to have some education, you might end up in the kitchen, calculating precisely how little food can keep 60 men alive without actually killing them. The brewery, surprisingly, is one of the few places with a hint of joy. Monks perfected beer not because they were merry, but because water was often contaminated, and beer provided needed calories during fasting periods. The church doesn't consider liquid to break a fast, a technicality exploited by generations of clever monks. It's still work, though, hauling grain, stirring massive vats, monitoring fermentation. But at least the smell is pleasant, unlike the tannery where animal hides become parchment in a stinking process that clings to your robes for days. But the physical labour, brutal as it is, isn't what breaks most monks. It's the scriptorium, the writing room. Here is where your body truly learns suffering. Imagine sitting on a backless wooden bench for 8 hours. The room is freezing because fire risks destroying precious manuscripts. The light comes through narrow windows, never enough, fading with every cloud. Your desk is angled, not for comfort, but to catch what little illumination exists. Your task? Copy, letter by letter, word by word, page by page. books that take months, sometimes years to complete. The quill in your hand might as well be made of lead for how heavy it feels after hours of precise strokes. Your fingers cramp, your wrist burns, your shoulders knot, your lower back screams. But you cannot move, cannot stretch, cannot seek relief. One error, one misplaced letter, and you might face punishment, or worse, waste precious parchment that required an entire sheep's skin to produce. The ink stains your fingers permanently black. Made from oak galls, iron and gum arabic, it's acidic enough to etch the parchment and your skin alike. Some pigments contain lead, mercury, arsenic, slowly poisoning you with every ornate initial you paint. Your eyes strain in the dim light, focusing on tiny lettering until the words swim and your vision blurs. Many monks are nearly blind by 40. The rest develop a permanent squint, their faces etched with lines from peering at text in poor light. And what are you copying? Sometimes glorious scripture? Yes, but often dull legal documents, property records, or tedious religious commentary written centuries ago. You don't choose the text. You don't question its value. You simply copy letter by perfect letter in mind-numbing repetition. This is not creative work. This is human printing press, your life measured in completed pages. In winter, the scriptorium becomes a special kind of torture chamber. The cold turns the ink thick and uncooperative. Your fingers grow so numb you can barely control the quill, but you cannot warm them at a fire. Smoke would damage the manuscripts. You cannot rub them together. You might spill the ink. You simply endure. As circulation abandons your extremities and pain becomes your constant companion. Learning isn't what you might imagine either. Yes, monasteries preserved knowledge through the Dark Ages, but most monks weren't scholars. Most were barely literate, memorizing Latin prayers phonetically, without understanding their meaning. Only a select few received true education, and even then, it was tightly controlled. Reading the wrong books, anything deemed heretical, could earn you severe punishment or worse. The abbot decides what you may learn. The abbot decides what you may question. The abbot decides when your education is complete. Curiosity isn't a virtue, but a dangerous tendency to be suppressed. Why is a question that leads to trouble. Better to accept, to memorize, to repeat. Knowledge isn't for enlightenment, but for preservation, like seeds stored away, not meant to be planted in your own mind. If you came to the monastery dreaming of scholarly pursuits, of philosophical discussions and intellectual growth, you'll find those dreams crushed under the weight of mindless repetition. The greatest minds of the medieval world did indeed flourish in monasteries, but they were rare exceptions in a system designed for obedience, not brilliance. As your eyes fail from years in the scriptorium, you'll move to other work. Your half-blind hands now weave baskets, or sort dried herbs, or pull weeds you can barely see. If you're fortunate, you might become a teacher of novices, passing on your knowledge before it dies with you. If not, you join the ranks of aging monks assigned to easier but demeaning tasks, your status diminishing as your usefulness wanes. Your body ages prematurely from the labour, your hands become permanently curled around phantom tools, your back never straightens, your knees develop painful swelling from countless hours on stone floors. By the time secular scholars are reaching their intellectual prime, you're physically broken, with precious little to show for your sacrifice. Yet there is one unexpected gift in all this toil. It silences the mind's darker whispers. The exhaustion of labour offers respite from the doubts that plague you during prayer. When your muscles burn and your body cries for rest, there's no energy left for existential questioning. Perhaps this is why the rule of Benedict prescribes such a perfect balance of prayer and work, not just for efficiency, but for sanity. The rhythm becomes your heartbeat. Lauds, then field work. Terce, then back to the scriptorium. Sext, then kitchen duty. The monastery bells dictate not just your prayers, but your labour, chopping your day into segments of alternating toil. There are no weekends, no vacations, no retirement, just the endless cycle of ora et labora until your body surrenders to death. And yet, despite everything, something remarkable happens in those parchment pages. Beauty emerges from suffering. The manuscripts you help create outlast empires. While kings rise and fall, while armies clash and retreat, your aching fingers preserve knowledge that would otherwise vanish into darkness. The price is your body, your comfort, your vision. The payment is immortality, not for you. Your name rarely appears on what you create, but for the words themselves. If there's meaning in your suffering, it's here, in what remains when you're gone. Not glory, not recognition, but the quiet triumph of preservation. In a world careening toward chaos, you and your brothers, with bent backs and ink-stained hands, hold back the tide of ignorance, one painful letter at a time. Personal hygiene, a luxury concept in the monastery. Bathing is considered a weakness of the flesh, and in some monasteries you only bathe a few times a year. Your ink-stained hands from the scriptorium remain that way, adding new layers of grime each day. After all, why clean the body when it's the soul that matters? The flesh is temporary, meant to be ignored, even despised. The Benedictine rule actually mentions washing, which makes it more progressive than many religious orders. But don't get excited. This washing means quickly splashing cold water on your face and hands before prayers. A full bath, that happens perhaps 3 times annually. Christmas, Easter, and Pentecost. Special occasions demand special cleanliness. The rest of the year, you marinate in your own sweat. You smell, your brothers smell. The entire dormitory reeks of unwashed bodies, bad breath, and bodily functions. But nobody mentions it because everybody smells the same. Your nose eventually gives up, fatigued by the constant assault. The stench becomes background, like the chanting or the silence, just another feature of monastic life that you stop noticing after months of sensory adaptation. Your robe, that coarse woolen garment that scratches your skin raw, is washed perhaps once a season. More often in summer if you're fortunate, less in winter when drying becomes impossible. You own 2, one to wear while the other is being washed. But washed is generous terminology for what happens. The robes are briefly soaked in cold water, sometimes with wood ash if you're lucky, then hung to dry. No soap, no scrubbing, just a token gesture toward cleanliness. Lice and fleas aren't occasional visitors, they are permanent residents. They nest in your hair, your beard, your robe, your bedding. At night, in that hard dormitory bed you complained about in silence, your body becomes a feast for these tiny parasites. The constant itching is maddening, especially during long prayer services when you must stand perfectly still. Your only defense is to shave your head. Hence the tonsure that marks you as a monk isn't just symbolic, it's practical pest control. The monastery has its own vocabulary for this suffering. It's not lice, it's God's tiny messengers, reminding you of humility. It's not rash, it's the flowering of bodily mortification. Pain isn't to be escaped but embraced. Discomfort is spiritual training. Scratching during prayers, that's a weakness of will that earns you penance. So you stand there itching madly, as tiny creatures feast on your blood and you offer it up as sacrifice. Skin diseases flourish in this environment. Fungal infections spread from brother to brother, creating patches of red, scaly skin that crack and weep. Impetigo, ringworm, scabies. The monastery becomes a petri dish of dermatological nightmares. Treatment consists mainly of prayers and perhaps some herbal poultices that do little but add to the symphony of smells emanating from your person. The toilet, or necessarium in monastery terminology, is a room you dread but cannot avoid. It's a long stone bench with holes cut at intervals, positioned over a flowing stream or cesspit. No privacy, no toilet paper, just a bucket of water or moss or leaves for cleaning yourself afterward. In winter, the draught from below chills parts of your anatomy that particularly resent the cold. In summer, the stench becomes almost solid, a miasma so thick you can taste it. You sit beside your brothers, performing your most private bodily functions in full view. Another opportunity for humility, the abbot would say. Another reminder that bodily shame is a worldly concern that has no place in spiritual life. So you adapt, learning to ignore the sounds and smells of your neighbours while they politely extend the same courtesy to you. The rule of silence applies here too, though this might be the one place you're grateful for it. Your teeth rot and fall out decades before they should. Without cleaning, without care, your mouth becomes a painful catalogue of decay. The constant bread in your diet, the same coarse, hard loaf that barely sustains you, contains stone particles from the millstones that gradually wear down your enamel. Toothaches become yet another form of suffering to offer up to God. When a tooth becomes too painful, it's pulled without ceremony using crude pliers. No painkillers, except perhaps a swig of the monastery's medicinal wine if you're fortunate. Your breath becomes a weapon, souring the air around you during communal prayers. But no one complains because their breath is equally foul. This is just another aspect of communal living, sharing everything, including the miasma of collective halitosis. The only relief comes from chewing herbs from the garden when you can sneak them. Mint or sage briefly masks the decay, but nothing solves the underlying issue. Your feet develop their own unique ecology, breeding corns, bunions, and fungus between toes that rarely see daylight. The sandals you wear offer minimal protection, and years of standing on cold stone floors for 8 daily prayer services leave them calloused and deformed. Washing them remains rare, though during Holy Thursday, the abbot might ceremonially wash the feet of selected monks in imitation of Christ. The rest of the year they're on their own. Monks develop a particular gait from years of poor hygiene and physical neglect. Slightly bow-legged to minimise chafing from unwashed skin. Hunched from manuscript work and constant prostration. Shuffling to accommodate painful feet and arthritic joints. You can spot a monk at 100 paces not just by his tonsure and robe, but by how his body has adapted to systematic neglect. The infirmera, the monk in charge of the infirmary, often treats skin conditions with vinegar or urine. Both sting horribly and neither helps much. For severe cases, you might receive a salve made from herbs and animal fat that adds its own distinct aroma to your collection of smells. The fat quickly turns rancid in the monastery's damp conditions, making the remedy sometimes worse than the affliction. Paradoxically, while neglecting physical cleanliness, monasteries were obsessed with ritual purity. Before handling sacred objects or books, you must wash your hands. Before receiving communion, you must rinse your mouth. The contrast is striking. Your body can fester with infection and crawl with parasites, but the chalice must remain spotless. The priorities are clear. Objects of faith deserve cleanliness. The human vessel does not. The justification runs deep. Church fathers wrote extensively about the dangers of bathing, not just the practical dangers of disease from shared water, but the spiritual dangers of bodily comfort and potential vanity. St. Jerome warned that a clean body and a clean dress mean an unclean soul. St. Benedict was more moderate but still cautious about too much washing. Your filth becomes a form of devotion, a visible sign of your rejection of worldly concerns. Some monasteries did have lavatoriums, washing rooms where monks could at least rinse their hands and faces, but these were utilitarian spaces, not meant for comfort or thorough cleaning. The water was cold, the time allotted brief. No soap, just water and perhaps a communal towel that itself becomes a vector for spreading skin conditions among the brothers. In rare cases, illness or old age might earn you a full bath as medical treatment, but even then it's administered with reluctance and warnings about not enjoying it too much. Pleasure, after all, is the enemy of salvation. If the bath feels good, it's probably bad for your soul. This twisted logic permeates every aspect of monastic hygiene. For all these reasons, monasteries developed distinctive scents that visitors remarked upon. The smell of unwashed bodies mingled with incense, candle smoke, old parchment, and damp stone. This peculiar aroma became so associated with holiness that it was almost excited. A clean monk would have seemed suspicious, worldly, and possibly vain. And you? After years in this environment, your senses dull. The itch of lice becomes background noise, the smell fades from consciousness, the discomfort of skin conditions becomes just another form of suffering to endure silently. Your body, already disciplined through fasting and labour, becomes numb to its own decay, exactly as the monastic philosophy intends. Because, in the end, this neglect serves a purpose. Your rotting teeth, your fungal skin, your parasite-infested hair all remind you daily that the body is temporary, a shell to be discarded. Physical comfort is worldly distraction. Cleanliness is vanity. And suffering is the fastest route to heaven. So you scratch when no one is looking, you shift your weight to relieve your aching feet during prayers, and you breathe through your mouth to avoid the stench, but you never, ever complain. The irony, of course, is that monasteries preserved medical knowledge through the Dark Ages. In those manuscript pages copied by your aching, ink-stained, unwashed hands are treatments and cures for the very conditions festering throughout the monastery. But theory rarely translates to practice, especially when suffering is considered a virtue and the body merely a vessel to be punished into submission. Sickness isn't a sign you need rest, it's an opportunity to suffer as Jesus suffered. Illness is a test and the monastery isn't a hospital. That persistent cough from the damp scriptorium, that fever from sleeping in freezing dormitories, those intestinal cramps from years of nutritional neglect, all are spiritual gifts, painful blessings to embrace rather than treat. The monastery infirmary exists, but it's hardly a place of healing. It's where monks go when they're too ill to stand for prayers, and sometimes where they go to die. The room is only marginally warmer than the rest of the monastery, with narrow beds lined against stone walls. Windows remain open regardless of weather, fresh air being considered essential for healing, even when that air carries winter frost that makes your breath visible. The infirmera, the monk in charge of this chamber of suffering, is often chosen not for medical knowledge, but for patience with the dying. His remedies come from tradition and ancient texts, not from effectiveness. When you arrive with a raging fever, his first treatment is likely bloodletting, cutting open a vein to release bad humours from your body. You watch your life force drain into a bowl, growing weaker with every drop, convinced this weakness is somehow curative. Remember those lice and fleas from your unwashed robes and bedding? They're not just irritants, they're disease vectors. Typhus spreads through the monastery, carried by infected fleas. The symptoms start innocently: headaches, muscle pains. Then comes the rash, spreading across your torso like a map of your body's surrender. Your fever spikes to hallucination levels. The infirmera's solution? More bleeding, more prayers, and perhaps cool cloths if you're fortunate. Tuberculosis thrives in the monastery's perfect conditions: overcrowded dormitories, malnourished bodies, and perpetually damp air. That brother who's been coughing blood into his handkerchief during morning prayers, he'll continue standing beside you, sharing chalices and common spaces until he physically collapses. Contagion control doesn't exist. How can disease spread when all suffering is divine purpose? Digestive ailments become so common they're barely considered illnesses. Chronic diarrhea, painful bloating, mysterious stomach cramps. These are just features of monastic life, as expected as prayers and labour. The coarse bread, the barely cooked beans, the rancid oils, and the general absence of fresh food create a digestive system in perpetual revolt. The infirmera's solution is usually fasting, giving your troublesome bowels nothing at all, which temporarily stops symptoms by replacing them with hunger pangs. Winter brings waves of influenza and pneumonia. Monks drop like flies, their bodies weakened by fasting, their immune systems compromised by exhaustion. You drag yourself to matins at 2 a.m. shivering with fever, standing in the icy church while your lungs fill with fluid. Missing prayers due to illness requires permission from the abbot himself, and he's not easily convinced. Better to collapse during service than be accused of spiritual laziness. The pharmacopoeia of the monastery is limited at best. Herbs from the garden, sage, mint, valerian, feverfew, are brewed into teas or made into poultices. These aren't entirely useless, but they're administered with inconsistent dosing and mixed with prayers that are considered the more important ingredient. For severe pain, there might be alcohol, the medicinal wine reserved for the truly suffering. Otherwise, pain is to be endured, even welcomed. Injuries receive similarly rudimentary treatment. Break a bone hauling stones for monastery repairs, and you might get it set, if the infirmera has that particular skill. Otherwise, it heals crooked, adding a permanent limp to your growing collection of bodily deformities. Cut yourself in the kitchen, vinegar to clean it, perhaps some spider webs to stop bleeding, and back to work you go. Stitches exist, but are reserved for the most grievous wounds. Dental problems. There's no dedicated treatment beyond extraction. The abscess throbbing in your jaw must wait until it's so unbearable you can't chew your daily bread. Then the tooth drawer comes with his pliers. No painkillers, no sterilisation, just a brother holding you down while another yanks the offending tooth from your jaw. The blood-filled hole left behind might get packed with wine-soaked cloth if infection sets in later. Eye problems flourish in the dim lighting of the monastery. Years of straining to read by candlelight in the scriptorium leave many monks nearly blind. Cataracts develop early, creating milky films that gradually erase the world. For this, there is no treatment at all. You're simply moved to duties that require less vision, perhaps tending the garden by feel or turning the prayer beads you can no longer see. Some monasteries had crude eyeglasses by the late medieval period, but they were rare treasures, not standard issue. The truly insidious aspect of monastic healthcare isn't the primitive treatments, it's the underlying philosophy. Illness isn't something to cure, it's something to interpret. Your fever isn't elevated body temperature, it's God's furnace burning away your sins. Your consumptive cough isn't fluid in the lungs, it's your body expelling spiritual impurities. Pain isn't a warning system, it's a message from beyond, a small installment payment on the suffering owed for your sinful nature. This perspective transforms every bedridden brother into a theological object lesson. The abbot visits the infirmary not primarily to comfort the sick, but to point out how Brother Thomas's patient endurance of painful shingles demonstrates proper spiritual submission. Your suffering becomes public property, a teachable moment for others. Privacy in illness? Another worldly comfort to be abandoned at the monastery gate. Medieval medicine did have some effective treatments hidden among its many failures. Certain herbal remedies worked for specific conditions. Honey did help prevent wound infections. Willow bark tea genuinely reduced fever and pain. But these effective treatments were buried within a system that fundamentally misunderstood disease causation. When every illness has spiritual significance, material treatments will always be secondary. Most perversely, the manuscripts you copy in the scriptorium often contain medical knowledge from ancient Greece and Rome, knowledge that might alleviate the very conditions plaguing the monastery. But theory rarely becomes practice when suffering is considered virtuous. You might spend months copying Galen's treatises on healing, while your own body wastes away from untreated disease. The monastery's approach to mental illness proves even more troubling. Depression, that dark cloud hovering over many monks after years of isolation, sleep deprivation and sensory restriction, isn't a psychological condition, but a sedia, the noonday demon. It's a spiritual failure, a sin to confess, not a condition to treat. Hallucinations from fever or starvation might be interpreted as visions or demonic attacks, depending on their content. Bizarre behaviour from brain infections could mark you as possessed. Old age in the monastery doesn't bring better care, just different problems. Your joints, after decades of kneeling on stone floors, swell with arthritis until every movement becomes torment. Your bones, weakened by nutritional deficiencies, break from minor falls. Your digestive system, after a lifetime of abuse, barely functions. For these age-related conditions, there is essentially no treatment beyond patience and prayer. Death, when it finally comes, might actually represent improvement. The brother washing your wasted body might use more water than you've felt in years. The clean robe they dress you in might be softer than anything you've worn since childhood. The prayers said over your corpse might be genuinely heartfelt rather than mechanically recited. In death, you briefly become the centre of attention after a lifetime of self-effacement. The supreme irony is that monasteries were the primary institutions preserving and advancing medical knowledge during the Dark Ages. Monks copied ancient medical texts, maintained physic gardens of medicinal herbs, and sometimes even practiced rudimentary healthcare for surrounding communities. Yet inside their own walls, they often rejected the very knowledge they preserved. Because to heal too effectively, to eliminate suffering too completely, would undermine the monastic project itself. And so you cough, you ache, you shiver, you waste away, all while copying texts that might save you, all while tending herbs that might cure you, all while praying to a God who seems to want you to suffer just a little bit more before you earn your heavenly reward. Sin isn't just punished by God in the afterlife, it's punished right here in the monastery, immediately and often publicly. While you're aching back from the scriptorium and your lice-infested robes already feel like punishment enough, the monastery has an entire arsenal of corrections designed to purify your soul through the suffering of your flesh. The rule of St. Benedict might speak of compassion, but monastery discipline operates on a simple principle. Pain teaches what words cannot. The body must be broken to save the soul, and in the medieval monastery, breaking bodies is practically an art form. Every transgression, no matter how minor, demands atonement. Fell asleep during prayers after your 2 a.m. matins wake-up, that's a punishment. Spoke during the Great Silence? That's a punishment. Your eyes lingered too long on a beautifully illuminated manuscript? Punishment. Coughed too loudly during scripture reading? You guessed it. Punishment. The chapter of faults is where Judgment Day comes weekly. The entire community gathers in the chapter house, and one by one monks confess their failings or worse, accuse others of transgressions. Brother Thomas was looking out the window during Vespers. Brother John was smiling during dinner. I had an impure thought while bathing. Each confession brings the sharp sting of humiliation, followed by the physical pain of correction. And there's nowhere to hide. Your shame is public, visible, communal property. For minor infractions, you might be assigned extra prayers, additional labour, or denied the already meagre portion of vegetables that passes for dinner. But for more serious offences, the punishments turn physical in ways that would make even the hardened criminals of the outside world flinch. Flogging is a monastery staple. You kneel before the altar or in front of your assembled brothers, stripped to the waist, despite the bone-chilling cold you've already endured during morning prayers, and receive lashes from a disciplinary rod. The number varies, 3 strikes for a minor slip, dozens for graver sins. The wounds from last week's correction may not have healed before new ones are laid across your back. And yet you're expected to thank the abbot afterward for this correction and kiss the rod that just tore your flesh. "Thank you, Father, for cleansing my soul," you mutter through gritted teeth as blood trickles down your spine to join the ink stains on your hands and the fleas in your unwashed robe. Food deprivation takes your already inadequate diet and reduces it further. While your brothers consume their daily gruel and coarse bread, you might be limited to bread and water only. Sometimes all food is withheld except a token crust, a special torment when your stomach is already twisted from malnourishment and parasites. Fasting as punishment can last days, sometimes weeks for serious transgressions, leaving you light-headed during prayer, shaking during labour, and even more susceptible to the illnesses already rampant in your damp, cold quarters. Isolation strikes at the heart of your already lonely existence. For all the silence and emotional distance of monastery life, being completely cut off is another level of torture. The monastery prison, yes, prison, is often a cell so small you cannot fully extend your body. No light except perhaps a sliver through a narrow slit. No heat, no conversation, just you, stone walls, and your thoughts, which turn darker with each passing hour. Some monks emerge from isolation cells changed men, quieter, more pliable, their spirits visibly broken. Others never fully return to sanity, and yet the abbot calls this mercy, correction, love. You begin to wonder if there's any difference between love and cruelty in this stone-cold world. Public humiliation adds psychological torment to physical pain. Eating on the floor while brothers step around you. Wearing signs detailing your sins. Standing at the monastery entrance and declaring your failings to every passing monk. Prostrating yourself at the doorway so others must step over your body to enter the church. The creativity applied to humiliation would be impressive if it weren't so deliberately crushing to the human spirit. "Look down at the floor as Brother William passes," the abbot announces. "He spoke during great silence and claimed he had permission when questioned." And so you become invisible, a ghost among the living, your isolation completed even in a room full of people. But these external punishments pale compared to what monks inflict upon themselves, because in the twisted logic of medieval monasticism, self-punishment is the highest form of devotion. The hair shirt, a garment made from coarse animal hair worn directly against the skin, creates constant irritation, open sores, and persistent pain. Designed to mortify the flesh, it succeeds spectacularly. Some monks wear these hidden beneath their robes for years, their skin never healing, always inflamed, a private agony known only to them and God. The fibres work themselves into open wounds, bringing the risk of infection on top of the intended pain. But infection too is just another opportunity for spiritual growth through suffering, isn't it? Flagellation becomes a private ritual for many. Behind closed doors, monks whip themselves with knotted cords, small chains or leather straps embedded with metal. Blood spatters against stone walls as they attack their own bodies to drive out sin, to punish natural desires, to demonstrate devotion through destruction of the flesh. The most zealous leave permanent scars across their backs, badges of spiritual warfare. Sleep deprivation, beyond the already brutal prayer schedule, becomes another self-imposed torment. Some monks sleep on bare stone rather than straw beds. Others wear belts lined with thorns or dagger points that dig into flesh if they move during sleep. Some stand for hours in prayer rather than kneeling, fighting against the body's desperate need for rest. Even food and water become weapons of self-discipline. Beyond the mandatory fast, some monks secretly spit out portions of their already meagre meals or mix their food with ashes to make it repulsive. Others limit their water intake despite raging thirst, offering their parched tongues as sacrifice. These private punishments occur even as their bodies waste away from malnutrition and their companions in the infirmary cough blood from tuberculosis. The psychology behind all this punishment is simple yet devastating. Your body is your enemy. Natural desires are sinful. Comfort is dangerous. Pain is purification. The only path to salvation is through suffering. This war against the self creates a particular type of inmate, perpetually anxious, obsessively monitoring every thought, word, and a glance for hint of sin. You second-guess yourself constantly. Was that laugh too joyful? Did I enjoy that rare taste of honey too much? Does my relief at finding the infirmary slightly warmer than the dormitory constitute the sin of comfort-seeking? Every thought becomes a potential sin. Every human reaction demands punishment. You become your own harshest critic, your own cruelest jailer. And when you fall short of impossible standards, as you inevitably must, you accept punishment not just willingly but gratefully, believing the pain is cleansing away impurity. The true horror isn't the physical pains, though God knows there's plenty of that between the fleas feasting on your unwashed skin, the pneumonia settling into your lungs from the morning prayers in the freezing church, and the rod striking your bare back for yawning during Vespers. No, the true horror is how completely normal it all becomes. After years in the monastery, punishment isn't an aberration. It's routine, expected, sometimes almost welcome, because at least physical pain drowns out the spiritual doubts, the loneliness, the creeping thought that perhaps all this suffering might be pointless. Pain becomes the most reliable companion in your monastic life, more consistent than God's voice, more present than human connection. And so as you kneel on stone pebbles for hours as punishment for a minor infraction, blood seeping from your knees, back aching, head pounding from hunger, you find yourself oddly calm. This at least makes sense in a world where nothing else does. This pain is tangible, real, when faith sometimes feels like grasping at shadows. The monastery has succeeded in its ultimate goal, convincing you that you deserve to suffer, that your pain is holy, and that the path to heaven is paved with blood, tears, and broken bodies. Your next stop after this punishment? The cold dormitory where you'll attempt to sleep before the 2 a.m. matins bell rings again, summoning you to prayer with knees still bleeding and back still raw. Because tomorrow is another day of discipline in the monastery, another opportunity to fail, to be punished, to suffer for glory of God. And you'll accept it all without question, because questioning itself has become the gravest sin of all. Winter in the monastery isn't just cold, it's a test of faith and human endurance. After enduring the public humiliation of yesterday's chapter of faults, where your shivering was mistaken for inattention during prayers, earning you an extra hour of kneeling on stone pebbles, you now face an even more relentless adversary, the bitter winter that transforms your stone sanctuary into an ice vault. The monastery wasn't built for comfort, it was built for eternity. Massive stone walls that have stood for centuries rise toward heaven, impressive to pilgrims and perfect for preserving the chill of winter deep within their core. Stone absorbs cold like a sponge absorbs water, holding it, amplifying it, releasing it slowly into your bones long after spring has warmed the outside world. The church is the worst, a cavernous space designed to reach toward heaven, with high ceilings that allow your prayers to ascend and all the heat with them, while nobles warm themselves by roaring fires and peasants huddle around hearths in their humble homes. You stand in what amounts to a magnificent refrigerator, breath visible, fingers numb, yet still expected to turn fragile manuscript pages without trembling. Brother, your voice wavers during the psalm, the choirmaster hisses. Of course it wavers. Your body is fighting to keep your vital organs functioning while you stand motionless for hours, but physical discomfort is no excuse for imperfect praise. The windows, those magnificent works of coloured glass that visitors admire during summer pilgrimages, become your enemies in winter. Early monasteries had simple openings with wooden shutters that at least could be closed against the elements, but architectural advancements brought glass, thin, single-paned glass that does almost nothing to block the wind but creates magnificent ice patterns on the inside surface. The more beautiful the window, the more frigid the draught it welcomes into your sacred space. Draught is too gentle a word. What whistles through these windows is a punishing Arctic blast that finds every gap in your garments. It circles the nave like a predator, sliding under your robes, penetrating the cloth as if it weren't there. The wind doesn't just pass through the church, it takes up residence, circling, howling during storms, creating its own mournful harmony to accompany your chants. Your feet suffer most acutely. The stone floor might as well be ice itself. Standing for hours during services, your feet lose sensation entirely. Some older monks can predict weather changes by which parts of their feet hurt most, or more alarmingly, which parts they can no longer feel at all. Frostbite is common, particularly among the elderly brothers who've spent decades standing on these frozen slabs. Sandals offer virtually no protection, just a thin piece of leather between your foot and the glacial stone. Some monasteries permit woolen socks in the deepest winter, a rare concession to human frailty. Others consider such comfort spiritually suspect, yet another test of your willingness to suffer as Christ suffered. The irony that Christ lived in the far milder climate of the Middle East goes unremarked upon. Even barefoot is required in some orders, a mortification that has cost many monks their toes over centuries. Those who've survived decades of monastic winter often display the telltale shuffling gait of feet permanently damaged by cold, joining their hunched backs from manuscript work and weakened lungs from damp dormitories. And what of the dormitory, your place of rest? Rest is a generous term for what happens in that frigid hall, where you and your brothers lie fully clothed, sometimes even in your sandals, on hard wooden platforms covered with thin straw mattresses. No fires burn here. Flame is considered too dangerous in sleeping quarters. Instead, you may receive an extra blanket, coarse wool that scratches your skin but provides minimal warmth. The winter night in an unheated dormitory becomes an exercise in endurance. You curl into yourself, trying to preserve body heat, listening to the coughing of brothers whose tuberculosis worsens in the cold. Sleep comes in fits and starts, more like brief losses of consciousness than true rest. And just when your exhausted body finally surrenders to slumber, the bell rings for matins, dragging you back into the even colder church. Rain transforms your world in different but equally miserable ways. The monastery becomes a symphony of drips, leaks finding their way through aged roofs to splatter on stone floors and wooden furnishings. Mould flourishes in corners, adding its distinctive smell to the already pungent aroma of unwashed bodies and damp wool. Your robes, never truly dry from yesterday's downpour, cling to your skin with clammy persistence. Humidity makes the cold more insidious, working its way deeper into your joints. The older monks move more slowly during the rainy season, their arthritic hands struggling to grasp prayer books, their swollen knuckles a roadmap of decades spent in damp misery. You watch them and see your future, assuming you survive long enough. The scriptorium becomes particularly challenging in winter. The precise work of manuscript copying requires dexterity that frozen fingers simply cannot manage. Ink behaves differently in cold, sometimes freezing in the inkwell overnight. Parchment becomes less pliable, more likely to crack. Yet the work continues because the monastery's obligations don't pause for human comfort. "Brother, this letter is malformed," the scriptorium master says, pointing to a slightly wavering line on the manuscript you've laboured over for hours with hands you can barely feel. "Your punishment will be to begin again, precious parchment wasted, another day spent hunched in the cold trying to control the fingers that have lost all sensation." Snow brings its own trials. The monastery doesn't shut down for weather. Prayer schedules remain unchanged, whether there's a dusting of snow or a blizzard raging. Paths must be cleared before dawn prayers, brothers shuffling through chest-high drifts in the darkness to reach the church. The effort leaves you sweating beneath your robes, moisture that quickly turns to ice against your skin when you stand motionless for the next 2 hours of prayer. The latrines become nearly unusable, ice forming on the stone seats, waste freezing before it can flow through the primitive drainage systems. Disease spreads more easily as basic hygiene becomes even more challenging than usual. Your already infrequent baths become impossible. Water freezes in the bathing room, where exposed skin would risk immediate frostbite anyway. Yet winter has one blessing. It kills some of the fleas and lice that torment you throughout warmer months. This small mercy is countered by the new visitors it brings, rodents seeking shelter, finding their way into food storage, dormitories, even the church itself. You might spot a rat scurrying across the altar during prayer, a sight you're expected to ignore as you focus on spiritual matters. The cruel irony is that much of this suffering would be preventable. The monastery has resources, wood for fires, materials for better insulation, knowledge of more effective heating methods, but warmth is considered dangerous to spiritual discipline. Cold keeps the body mortified, the mind alert, the spirit focused on salvation rather than comfort. Your suffering isn't incidental, it's by design. Summer offers no true respite, merely exchanging one misery for another. The same stone that holds winter's chill radiates summer's heat. Thick woolen robes become torture devices in July, trapping sweat against your skin, creating painful rashes that join your collection of physical torments. The dormitory, airless and packed with bodies, becomes suffocating. Sleep is even more elusive as you lie sweating on your straw mattress, listening to the chorus of coughing that never truly ceases. Water becomes precious in summer drought, carefully rationed, prioritized for drinking and cooking rather than washing. Your thirst is never fully quenched, your body never truly clean. The garden work becomes backbreaking in the heat, yet the schedule remains relentless. Prayer, work, study, all continuing despite temperatures that would send peasants seeking shade and nobles retreating to cooler castle chambers. After years bowed in the monastery, you develop an intimate relationship with discomfort. Your body becomes a weather vane, different pains signaling changing seasons. The ache in your left knee that worsens before rain, the tightness in your chest that comes with the first autumn chill, the dizziness that accompanies summer heat. You've learned to pray through chattering teeth, to sing while shivering, to copy manuscripts with fingers you cannot feel. You've mastered the art of layering your limited garments to create small pockets of warmth. You've discovered which corner of the dormitory has the least vicious draught, and which stone in the church somehow retains a touch of warmth from the day's sun. This is your life now, measuring years not by holidays or celebrations, but by the cycling of discomfort. Winter's bite, spring's damp, summer's suffocation, autumn's chill, and through it all the constant, unchanging rhythm of prayer, work, punishment, and endurance. When visitors come in summer, admiring the cool interior of your stone prison, you want to laugh at their ignorance. How peaceful, they murmur, how removed from worldly concerns. If only they could see you at matins in February, standing in near darkness, bones aching with cold, watching your breath form clouds as you chant ancient words with lips almost too numb to form them. This is the monastery's greatest test, not the silence, not the fasting, not even the public humiliations of the chapter of faults. It's the cold that seeps so deeply into your being that you begin to wonder if you'll ever feel warm again, in this life or the next. When you enter the monastery, you die to the world. That means your family, parents, siblings, all those you once loved, are now just fading memories. The stone walls that trap winter's chill and summer's heat serve another purpose just as cruel. They sever you from human connection as completely as the blade that sheared away your hair during the tonsure ceremony. Your vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience received much attention during your novitiate, but perhaps the most profound sacrifice was never explicitly named: the complete amputation of your former identity and relationships. Your former self was buried the day you took your vows, and no one held a funeral. Most brothers entered as oblates, children given to the monastery by parents who had too many mouths to feed or hoped that offering a son to God might bring divine favour to the family. You were perhaps 5 or 6 when the monastery gates closed behind you, your small hand released from your father's grip for the last time. Too young to understand the permanence of this separation, you cried for your mother at night until an older monk's stern admonishment taught you that such attachment was sinful. Unlike the cold that eventually gives way to spring or the wounds from punishment that eventually scar over, this separation is absolute and eternal. The rule is clear. The monastery is your new family. Your brothers in Christ have replaced your brothers in blood. Your abbot is your father now. And if your actual father should fall ill, or your mother die, or your sister marry, these events occur in a world that no longer concerns you. Familial visits are either forbidden entirely or restricted to the point of meaninglessness. Some orders allow one brief visit per year, conducted in the presence of the abbot or prior, with strict limitations on conversation topics. You may not embrace your mother or clasp your father's hand. Physical contact belongs to your old life. You must maintain the detachment befitting a man who has renounced worldly attachments. Others forbid direct contact entirely. At most, a family member might glimpse you during Mass if the monastery church serves the local community. They sit in the nave while you stand in the choir, separated by screens or architectural barriers, a physical manifestation of the divide between secular and religious life. You might sense your mother's presence, feel her eyes upon you, but you cannot acknowledge her without risking punishment. Letters from family, if permitted at all, are opened and read by the abbot before reaching you. Many are deemed too worldly or emotionally stirring and never delivered. Your own correspondence, if allowed, is similarly censored. Over time, these tenuous connections wither. Your siblings marry, have children, live lives you know nothing about. Your parents age and eventually die, sometimes without your knowledge. Brother Michael, a messenger brings word that your mother has passed, the abbot might announce months after her burial. You are expected to receive this news with equanimity, perhaps request a mass for her soul, but display no excessive grief. After all, what is death but the fulfillment of her earthly journey? Your own emotional response is just another attachment to mortify. The isolation extends beyond family to society itself. While certain monasteries maintain connections to the outside world through charity work or education, many are closed systems. News of wars, plagues, famines, or political changes might never reach you, or arrive so filtered through religious interpretation that you can barely discern the actual events. You don't know who wears the crown unless prayers for the monarch's health mention a name. You don't know if the harvest failed unless the monastery's own storerooms reflect the shortage. Villages could rise and fall within miles of your walls, and you might never hear of it. This isolation is particularly cruel because it's so complete yet so tantalizing. Unlike a hermit in a remote cave, you often live within sight of the world you've renounced. From the monastery garden, you might glimpse peasants working fields, children playing, young couples walking together. During your rare trips to town on monastery business, you walk through markets and squares, a black-robed ghost among the living, observing but never participating in human connection. The psychological impact of this separation is profound. Brothers who entered as adults often struggle most visibly, having known what they sacrificed. You might catch them staring toward the village during work periods, or notice tears quickly hidden during prayers for family members. Those who entered as children often have different wounds, a vague sense of loss for connections they can barely remember, or a curiosity about basic human experiences they've never known. Some monks develop elaborate coping mechanisms. One brother might adopt a bird or small animal as a surrogate for the emotional connections he's forbidden to maintain with humans. Another meticulously carves wooden figures that bear suspicious resemblance to the family he left behind. Yet another volunteers excessively for tasks that might bring brief, superficial contact with lay people, manning the porter's lodge or distributing alms. The monastery hierarchy understands the danger of these emotional attachments all too well. Strong bonds between individual monks are discouraged as vigorously as connection to the outside world. Particular friendships, relationships between monks that grow too close or affectionate, are considered spiritually dangerous. Brothers who spend too much time in each other's company face reassignment to different tasks, different parts of the monastery, different prayers schedules. Brother Thomas and Brother John have been seen conversing outside of necessary work communication, the prior announces gravely during chapter. Both will face discipline, separation, and increased scrutiny. The message is clear: your only significant relationship should be with God. Human connection is a distraction at best, a sin at worst. Years pass in this emotional vacuum. Decades, perhaps. You recognize your brother's faces, know their habits and mannerisms, pray beside them thousands of times, yet may never truly know them as people. The monk who chants beside you at Vespers might have lost 3 sisters to plague before entering the monastery. The brother who works silently alongside you in the garden might have left behind a betrothed whose name he still whispers in his sleep. You'll likely never know these stories, and no one will ever know yours. The cruel irony is that monasteries often serve as repositories of knowledge, preserving books and learning while deliberately severing the human connections that give that knowledge context and meaning. You may copy manuscripts about family lore or love poetry without ever experiencing the relationships they describe. You may transcribe medical texts while ignoring the very human pain of wondering whether your aging parents received proper care in their final days. This isolation reshapes you fundamentally. Your emotional range narrows. Your understanding of human nature becomes theoretical rather than experiential. Your conception of love becomes increasingly abstract, filtered through theological frameworks rather than lived reality. Even your empathy atrophies from disuse, like a limb immobilized for too long. Some brothers find peace in this separation, embracing the spiritual ideal of detachment. Others develop a different kind of connection, with saints long dead, with Christ's suffering, with the rhythms of liturgical seasons. For them, the monastery's isolation permits a focus impossible in the world of human relationships and responsibilities. But many others simply hollow out year by year, prayer by prayer. The emotional starvation is as real as the physical hunger of your meagre diet, the cold of winter matins, the pain of disciplinary floggings. It's a slow, quiet suffering that leaves no visible marks but penetrates more deeply than any physical deprivation. On rare occasions, you might catch glimpses of the world beyond your walls when performing assigned duties. Perhaps you see a father teaching his son to fish in the nearby stream, their laughter carrying across the water, or a mother comforting a crying child with an embrace that looks like everything you've forgotten about human touch. These moments cut deeper than the abbot's disciplinary rod ever could. You try to pray away these feelings as you've been taught. You confess the sin of attachment, perform your penances, redouble your devotion to spiritual matters. But in the darkest hours before matins, as you lie shivering on your hard bed, the questions sometimes come unbidden. Does my sister have children now? Did my father think of me before he died? Does anyone outside these walls remember my name? And perhaps most dangerous of all, is this isolation truly the path to God, or simply the surest way to forget what it means to be human? The monastery isn't where you escape temptation. It's where you must face it day after day in loneliness and silence. You thought stone walls would protect you from the world's seductions. You were wrong. They just trap you with your own demons, giving them nowhere to go but deeper inside your mind. The rule of St. Benedict is clear. The flesh must be subdued, but your flesh doesn't know it's supposed to be holy. It remembers what warm bread tastes like. It craves the comfort of a real bed. It wants to run through an open field instead of shuffling between chapel and scriptorium. Your body doesn't understand why it's being punished when it hasn't committed any crime except being human. Sexual desires don't disappear when you done the habit. They just go underground, surfacing in dreams that leave you sweating and ashamed before dawn prayers. The older monks warn about succubi, female demons who visit in the night to tempt the faithful. But you know it's not demons. It's just your body, remembering what it's like to be alive. Idle hands are the devil's workshop, the abbot reminds you daily, so you are never idle. From dawn until dusk, your hands copy manuscripts, pull weeds, knead bread, or screw up floors. Exhaustion is the weapon against desire. If your body is too tired to stand, perhaps it will be too tired to want. But even as your fingers bleed from work, your mind wanders to forbidden territories. Memories of village festivals, the smell of your mother's cooking, the face of a girl you once knew. The rule offers solutions for these urges. If suggestions of the devil arise in his heart, let him dash them against Christ immediately. In practice, this means immediate confession, followed by penance. Depending on the severity of your thoughts, you might find yourself spending the night prostrate on the cold stone floor, fasting for days, or feeling the lash across your bare back in the chapter house. For many monks, self-mortification becomes the answer. You witness brothers wearing hair shirts beneath their robes, coarse garments woven with animal hair, sometimes embedded with thorns that tear at the flesh with every movement. Some wear cilices, spiked chains wrapped around the thigh that dig into the flesh with every step. The pain is the point. Physical suffering is meant to distract from inner temptation. Brother Anselm sleeps with stones in his bed, whispers a novice. You've seen him limping. Brother Thomas stands in ice water during winter matins. These aren't just stories, these are survival strategies. When desire burns within, cold water, sharp stones, and knotted whips become tools to remind the body who's in charge. Food becomes a peculiar obsession in this world of denial. You dream not of jewels or palaces, but of butter on bread, a chunk of cheese, a bite of meat. During the long fast when the monastery subsists on water and a single meal of dry bread, you find yourself thinking about food constantly. You catch yourself staring at the abbot's plate during the rare feast days, counting every morsel he consumes. You learn to navigate the contradiction of monastic life. You must confess every impure thought, yet some things are too shameful to speak aloud. The older monks can see temptation on your face before you even recognize it in yourself. Your eyes wander during prayers, brother, they'll say. Satan finds work in a restless gaze. And then there's the deepest temptation of all, freedom. You watch birds soar over the monastery walls and feel something twist inside your chest. Sometimes, while working in the vegetable garden, you find yourself calculating the distance to the gate, wondering how far you could run before they caught you. These thoughts terrify you more than any carnal desire, because they strike at the very foundation of your vows. Some brothers do run. They disappear in the night, leaving behind their habits folded on empty beds. The monastery doesn't speak of them, except as cautionary tales. Brother Martin fled last Easter, an elderly monk tells the novices, found frozen in the forest a week later, stripped by thieves and half-eaten by wolves. Whether true or not, the message is clear. The world outside offers only death to those who break their vows. The demons of acedia, spiritual apathy, and tristitia, overwhelming sadness, are constant companions to many monks. These aren't just melancholy moods. In monastic writings, they're active forces that attack the soul, making prayer feel empty and vows seem pointless. When they take hold, even the most devout brother finds himself wondering, why am I here? What purpose does this suffering serve? Prayer is both the battle and the weapon. When desires become overwhelming, you're taught to recite psalms until the thoughts retreat. You press your forehead against the stone floor during prostrations, hoping the cold will clear your mind. You confess the same sins week after week, month after month, year after year, in an endless cycle of transgression and penance. Sleep brings little relief. Your dreams betray you nightly, filling your unconscious hours with everything you've renounced: feasts, women, comfort, home. You wake in the frigid darkness before matins, heart pounding, body responding in ways that fill you with shame. Then you rise, splash icy water on your face, and join your brothers in the choir stalls, pretending the night brought only peaceful communion with God. The greatest shock of monastic life isn't the cold or the hunger, or even the silence. It's discovering that the cloister doesn't free you from temptation, it intensifies it. Every denial creates a corresponding desire. Every restriction generates a longing to break it. The very walls that keep the world out keep your wants circulating within, growing stronger in the silence. Yet somehow many monks find a kind of peace, not by conquering desire, but by accepting its presence. The eldest brothers, the ones with eyes clear as water and hands steady as stone, tell you, the test isn't to feel nothing. The test is to feel everything and still choose God. They've learned to sit with their hunger, their loneliness, their doubts, acknowledging them without being consumed. For every monk who breaks, who flees in the night, or descends into madness or secret sin, there are others who endure. They transform their struggle into something else, devotion that burns all the brighter because it's tested daily. Their manuscripts become more beautiful, their prayers more profound, their service more genuine precisely because they know the cost. You learn to redirect your passions. The energy that might have gone into worldly pursuits now fuels your work. Your hands, which might have caressed a lover, now create illuminated letters of gold and lapis. Your voice, which might have sung tavern songs, now chants ancient psalms in the darkness before dawn. Nothing is lost, just transmuted, like lead into gold in an alchemist's crucible. There's a strange pride in this battle. While knights fight visible enemies with swords and shields, you fight invisible ones with nothing but will and faith. No one will write songs about your victories. No one will know the dragons you've slain in the silence of your cell, but you know, and in the moments of clarity between temptations, that knowledge feels like enough. As the years pass, the nature of desire changes. You no longer crave what you've never had, you crave what you've lost. The memory of sun on your face, the sound of a child's laughter, the touch of another human hand without sin attached to it. These longings can't be beaten away with a discipline rod or frozen out with winter prayers. They live in your bones. Yet each day you rise, each hour you pray, each year you renew your vows. The temptations never leave, they just become familiar companions on the road to salvation. And in time you realize that perhaps they were never obstacles at all, but the very path itself. Because what is faith if not the choosing God again and again, when every human instinct calls you elsewhere? You stand now in the chapter house watching a young novice confess his struggles with temptation, seeing the shame on his face that once covered your own. And though the rule forbids it, you feel a moment of connection, of shared humanity. You want to tell him, the battle never ends, brother, but neither does the victory. Faith isn't always enough to fill the emptiness. Sometimes, in the lonely darkness, you wonder, is all this sacrifice worth it? While physical temptations torment your body, doubt corrodes your soul. It's the silent poison that no amount of self-flagellation can purge. The irony of monastery life is crushing. You've given up everything to serve God, yet here, in this sacred space, is where God sometimes feels most absent. The silence that was meant to bring you closer to the divine instead amplifies the void. You strain to hear heavenly whispers and hear only your own breathing, the scrape of sandals on stone, the endless tolling of the monastery bell. Doubt doesn't arrive with trumpets or warning. It creeps in during the pre-dawn darkness of matins when you've been awake for hours and your body screams for rest. It nestles between the lines of scripture you've copied 1,000 times until the holy words blur into meaningless shapes. It waits for you in the shadows of the church when you're alone after Compline, kneeling until your legs go numb, begging for a sign that never comes. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. You whisper this prayer from the Gospels, but quietly, so no one hears. Because admitting doubt in the monastery isn't just a personal failing at It's dangerous. Heresy is still punished by death in the world beyond these walls, and even within them, the brother who questions too loudly might find himself in the monastery prison, subsisting on bread and water until his faith returns, or until he learns to pretend it has. So you swallow your questions like bitter medicine. Why does God allow such suffering in the world? Why must we deny every human comfort to please him? If the path to salvation is so clear, why does it feel like wandering in darkness? These thoughts circle like ravens, picking at the corpse of your certainty. The worst moments come at night in the dormitory, when you lie awake listening to the chorus of snores and coughs, thinking about all you've sacrificed, your family, whom you'll never see again, the children you'll never father, the simple pleasures of a life not governed by bells and rules. In these dark hours, heaven seems like a distant promise, while your losses are immediate and real. You remember Brother Thomas, who spent 40 years in perfect observance, never breaking his vows, never missing a prayer, until one morning they found him hanging from a roof beam in the granary. No one spoke of him afterward. Suicide is the ultimate sin, the unforgivable rejection of God's gift of life. But sometimes you think you understand his final desperate act, not as a rejection of God, but as a frantic attempt to find him, to force an encounter that life had denied. The monastery offers only one legitimate response to doubt: more prayer, more work, more mortification. When faith falters, it must be because you haven't tried hard enough, haven't surrendered enough of yourself, haven't broken your will completely, so you double down on your devotions, volunteer for the most unpleasant tasks, deny yourself even the small comforts permitted by the rule. "Brother, why did you not eat your portion at dinner?" the abbot asks, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "I am fasting for clarity, Father," you reply, not mentioning the gnawing emptiness that isn't hunger, but something deeper. God does not ask us to destroy our bodies, only to subject them to the spirit, he reminds you. But you've tried subjecting your body. Now you're trying to shock your soul into feeling something, anything, even if it's just pain. The Church Fathers wrote of this condition: acedia, the noonday demon, the spiritual malaise that attacks even the most devout. St. John Cassian called it the most oppressive of all demons. You recognize its symptoms: weariness with holy things, restlessness during prayer, the constant urge to leave your cell, to be anywhere but here, doing anything but this. The monastery's answer is always the same: resist, persist, endure. You witness other brothers fighting the same battle. Brother Anselm, once the most zealous among you, now mechanically moves through prayers, his eyes flat and empty. Brother Matthew spends hours in the chapel, rocking back and forth, murmuring to himself as tears stream unchecked down his weathered face. Brother Luke, the brilliant scribe, suddenly can't copy a single page without errors, as though his mind is elsewhere. None of them speak of their struggles, neither do you. The abbot tells you about the dark night of the soul, that period of spiritual desolation that St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross described. It is a gift, he insists. God withdraws his consolation so that you learn to love him for himself, not for the comfort he brings. You nod as though this makes sense, as though it doesn't sound like a lover making excuses for abandonment. What terrifies you most isn't the thought that God doesn't exist. It's the thought that he does exist, but is nothing like what you've been taught. Not the loving Father, not the merciful Saviour, but something colder, more distant, unmoved by human suffering. A God who demands everything and gives nothing back, who enjoys watching his creations squirm like insects under a magnifying glass, burning with devotion in the hopes of reward they'll never see. Sometimes you wonder if the monastery itself is the problem. This man-made system of rules and rituals, of punishments and hierarchies, is this really what God wants? Or is it just another human attempt to control what can't be controlled, to simplify what can't be simplified? But these thoughts are too dangerous to entertain for long. They undermine not just your faith, but your entire existence. At confession, you admit to minor infractions, breaking the silence, daydreaming during prayers, but never to the real sin festering in your heart, the growing suspicion that you've wasted your life. The priest gives you penance for the small sins and remains oblivious to the greater one. You perform the assigned prayers and feel nothing. You watch the truly devout with a mixture of envy and suspicion. Brother Peter, who radiates joy during the most grueling services. Brother James, who speaks of visions and divine consolations. Are they touched by grace, or are they simply better at the performance of faith? Have they mastered a kind of spiritual theatre that you're too honest or too stubborn to learn? On rare occasions, you glimpse something that rekindles hope. A shaft of coloured light through the church windows, painting the stones with impossible beauty. The perfect unity of voices during the Gloria, when for just a moment, it seems like heaven might be listening. The peace that sometimes settles over you in the garden, hands deep in soil, surrounded by growing things that ask nothing, prove nothing, but simply exist in divine simplicity. These moments never last. The light shifts, the hymn ends, the doubts return. But they leave a residue, a memory of meaning that keeps you going through the desert stretches. Some monks break under the strain of unresolved doubt. They flee the monastery, disappearing into the night. Others retreat into a kind of madness, creating elaborate theological systems that make sense only to themselves. Some find refuge in fanaticism, becoming more Catholic than the Pope, enforcing rules with a zealotry that frightens even the abbot. A few simply go silent, performing their duties like automatons, neither believing nor disbelieving, existing in a kind of spiritual limbo. You choose a different path. You make peace with uncertainty, not a comfortable peace, but a truce, an acceptance that your life will be spent in pursuit of something you may never fully grasp or experience. You learn to serve not out of perfect faith, but out of habit, duty, and the slim hope that meaning exists even when you can't feel it. The opposite of faith isn't doubt, an old monk tells you once in a rare moment of candour. It's certainty. Only the fool is certain. His words stay with you, offering a strange comfort on the darkest nights. And so you continue, day after day, year after year, divided against yourself. The monk who performs the rituals with perfect precision, and the doubter who watches from within, questioning everything, not oneself, but two, coexisting in the same habit, kneeling before the same altar, hoping for the same salvation. You pray when tired, you pray when hungry, you pray when your soul feels like a dried riverbed. Prayer isn't a choice, it's the air you breathe. And sometimes, when you least expect it, that air carries the faintest scent of something beyond yourself, beyond this world. Not enough to banish doubt, but just enough to keep you praying. You've spent a lifetime standing too close to the fire of faith, kneeling too long on cold stone and breathing too little fresh air. It was never a question of if your body would fail, just when. After decades battling temptations of the flesh and doubts of the spirit, you now face an enemy that cannot be defeated through prayer or mortification, your own decaying body. The rule makes no allowances for old age. St. Benedict wrote of care for the elderly of brothers, but in practice you're expected to maintain the same punishing schedule whether you're 20 or 70. The bells still ring at 2 a.m. for matins. The stone floors are just as cold, the fasts just as long. Only now your bones scream in protest with every genuflection. Your knees, once merely painful after hours of prayer, have become misshapen lumps of agony. Decades of kneeling on stone has left you with joints that look like gnarled tree roots and feel like broken glass. You rise from prayer in stages, first to your hands, then to one knee, then pushing against the choir stool to finally achieve a hunched version of standing. Younger monks pretend not to notice your struggle. Compassion would only embarrass you both. Your back, permanently curved from years of bowing and bending over manuscripts, has frozen into a perpetual stoop. You've lost inches of height, your once straight spine compressed and twisted until you're forever looking down at the ground, as if searching for a dropped coin. The constant cold and damp of the monastery have seeped into your vertebrae, turning them brittle as ancient parchment. Brother Thomas needs help reaching the high shelf, they whisper. What they don't say is that you used to be tall enough to reach it easily. Now you're a shrinking, contracting version of yourself folding inward like a dying leaf. Your hands, once your most precious tools, betray you daily. The fingers that illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and copied scripture with perfect precision now tremble uncontrollably. They curl inward, refusing to straighten completely, as if still gripping the quill you can no longer use. Arthritis has swollen your knuckles to painful knobs, making every task, from buttoning your habit to holding your spoon, an exercise in frustration and pain. The scriptorium, once your sanctuary, has become a place of humiliation. After 4 decades of meticulous work, you can no longer produce a single clean page without smudges and tremors marring the text. The abbot has kindly moved you to simpler tasks, grinding pigments, cutting parchment, tasks a child could do. You accept this demotion with outward humility and inward despair. Your eyesight dims year by year, the price of decades reading in poor light, squinting at tiny letters by guttering candles and narrow windows. Colours blur. Text swims on the page. During night services, you sing from memory because you can no longer see the words. You've become a hazard in dark corridors, feeling your way along stone walls, occasionally stumbling into younger brothers who mutter apologies but secretly resent your slowness. The Lord is my shepherd, you recite in the darkness, both prayer and practical guide as you navigate the shadowy world your monastery has become. Your teeth, those that remain, ache constantly. Years of coarse bread, poor nutrition, and no dental care have left your mouth a painful ruin. You chew on one side then the other, until both sides fail, and then you gum your food like an infant, often going hungry rather than facing the pain and indignity of eating. Abscesses form and drain, leaving your mouth tasting of copper and rot. You learn to speak with your lips barely parting, hiding the gaps and blackened stumps. Sleep, never plentiful in the monastery, becomes even more elusive. Your body, exhausted as it is, refuses to find comfort on the hard bed. Pains shoot through your hips when you lie on your side. Your back screams when you lie flat. Your breathing rattles and wheezes in the quiet dormitory. You doze in fragments, an hour here, minutes there, before the bells call you to prayer again. The young monks complain of fatigue after 5 hours of sleep. You haven't had 5 consecutive hours of rest in years. The cold, which younger brothers endure with mere discomfort, has become your constant tormentor. It settles into your joints, making them stiffen like unused hinges. It wraps around your chest, turning every breath into a shallow gasp. Even in summer, you can't get warm. You add layers under your habit, against the rule, but necessity overrides obedience at this point. You sit closer to the meagre fires when you can, drawing disapproving glances from the novice master, who sees only rules broken, not suffering endured. Incontinence becomes your secret shame. Your bladder, once able to hold through the longer services, now betrays you without warning. You severely restrict your water intake, leading to dizziness and confusion, but preferring these to the alternative. When accidents happen, and they do, you wash your own robes in private, hanging them to dry in hidden corners of the monastery. The ammoniac smell follows you, despite your efforts. You see brothers wrinkle their noses as you pass. Memory fails you in embarrassing ways. The Psalms, which you've recited daily for 50 years, suddenly vanish from your mind mid-verse, leaving you silent while your brothers continue. The names of saints blur together. The faces of novices appear familiar one day, foreign the next. You find yourself in corridors, unsure whether you are coming or going. Was it time for Vespers or Compline? Were you headed to the refectory or returning from it? "I've been a monk longer than you've been alive," you snap at a young brother, who gently corrects your place in the liturgy. The flash of anger surprises you both, another sign of failing control. Disease visits old monks more frequently, staying longer with each visit. Coughs settle deep in your lungs, rattling for months, sometimes years. Fevers come and go like unwelcome guests. Your digestive system revolts against the monastery diet it tolerated for decades, leaving you weakened from flux and unable to absorb what little nutrition your meals contain. Minor cuts and scrapes, once healed in days, now linger for weeks as open sores on paper-thin skin. The monastery infirmarian, once a stranger, becomes as familiar as your confessor. His remedies, bleeding, purging, bitter herbal concoctions, often seem worse than the ailments they're meant to cure. But you submit to them as you've submitted to everything else, another suffering to offer up, another mortification to endure. This too is prayer, the infirmarian murmurs as he applies stinging poultices to your bed sores. Most painful is the invisibility. After a lifetime of service, copying manuscripts, teaching novices, maintaining the monastery gardens, singing God's praises at every hour, you've become a ghost. Younger monks look past you, their eyes sliding away from your infirmity as if age might be contagious. At chapter meetings, your raised hand goes unnoticed. In processions, your shuffling pace holds others back, earning sighs of impatience rather than offers of assistance. The abbot speaks of the dignity of age, while assigning you tasks fit for children. Your opinions, once valued for their wisdom and experience, are now dismissed as the ramblings of a mind past its prime. The old ways, they say, not unkindly but firmly, as they implement changes to traditions you've observed for half a century. You watch novices enter, take vows, become elders, and die, the cycle spinning faster as your perception of time accelerates. Brothers who were children when you were middle-aged now run the monastery. The abbot himself was once a boy you taught to form letters. Now he speaks to you slowly, loudly, as if your hearing is as damaged as your eyesight. What hurts most is that while your body makes its painful decline obvious to all, no one sees the interior struggle that continues unabated. The temptations you battled in youth have transformed but haven't disappeared. The spiritual doubts that plagued your middle years haven't resolved with age. If anything, as death approaches, the great questions loom larger. Was it worth it? Will God receive you? Has this life of sacrifice earned you anything but pain? You still rise for matins, though it takes you twice as long to reach the church. You still fast during Lent, though your body can ill afford the deprivation. You still kneel, though rising becomes an ordeal witnessed at with embarrassed glances. You still copy simple texts, your writing now large and wavering like a child's, not because you expect recognition or reward, but because after 60 years, devotion has carved the channels in your soul that only death will erase. At night, lying awake while pain and memories circle like wolves, you sometimes wonder what might have been, the family you never had, the simple pleasures you never tasted. But these thoughts no longer carry the sting they once did. You've made your choice every day for decades, renewing your vows not just annually before the abbot, but moment by moment, prayer by prayer. And there is this. While your peers in the outside world might have enjoyed more comforts, more freedom, more human monk connection, they too now face diminished bodies and approaching death. Their joints also fail, their eyes also dim. The difference is that you've been practicing for death your entire life. Every day of denial, every hour of prayer, every moment of surrender has been preparation for the final surrender. The monastery is a good place to grow old, an ancient brother told you when you were still young. Not because it's comfortable, but because it teaches you that comfort was never the point. Only now do you fully understand his words. For a monk, death isn't a tragic ending. It's liberation, the gateway to the reward you've spent a lifetime earning. After decades of battling desires that never fully disappeared, wrestling with doubts that returned like the tide, and watching your body crumble under the weight of devotion, death arrives not as an enemy, but as a familiar companion. You've been rehearsing for this moment your entire monastic life. Every day you died a little, to comfort, to freedom, to self. Your tonsure ceremony was itself a kind of funeral marking the death of your old identity. The black robe you've worn for decades is already your shroud. You've been dying since the day you entered these walls. When the final illness comes, perhaps that persistent cough that blossomed into bloody phlegm, or the fever that never broke, or simply the accumulated exhaustion of a body pushed beyond endurance, there is almost a sense of relief. Your brothers notice when you can no longer rise for matins. When your place in the choir stands empty, they know. The infirmarian guides you to a hard bed in the infirmary, where you'll likely never leave. The monastery doesn't stop its rhythms for your dying. The bells still ring, prayers continue, manuscripts still need copying. You are just one monk among many who have passed through these stones. The community carries on as you fade. There is no dramatic farewell, no gathering of loved ones with tearful goodbyes. You've already said goodbye to the world decades ago. Instead, there is ritual, always ritual. The same prayers that have structured your everyday now usher you toward eternity. Brothers take turns sitting beside you, not for emotional comfort, but to ensure your soul doesn't depart without proper guidance. They're not there to hold your hand, they're there to hold your soul, to keep it from wandering or being claimed by demons in its vulnerable state. You once feared the temptations of the flesh, the ancient brother whispers as he dabs your cracked lips with water. Soon, brother, you will be free of flesh entirely. As the end approaches, the abbot is summoned. Your confession is heard one final time. Perhaps those same sins of thought that have haunted you since novitiate days, the desires that never died despite decades of mortification. The oil of extreme unction is applied to your forehead, your hands, your feet. The same body you've punished and denied is now anointed as something second. The irony isn't lost on you, even through the haze of fever. Your brothers bring the crucifix for you to kiss. Those lips that have spoken thousands of prayers now press against the carved feet of the Saviour. The taste of wood and tallow wax is the last earthly flavour you'll know. Not a mother's cooking, not sweet wine, not a lover's kiss, just the cold press of wooden Christ against failing lips. Remember your vows, the abbot intones. Stability, conversion of life, obedience. You have kept them. Now go to receive what was promised. What was promised? The heaven you fixed your eyes upon through endless cold mornings in the choir, through decades of unvoiced doubts, through physical deterioration and spiritual drought. Was it real? Was any of it real? These questions that you dared not speak aloud during life crowd around your deathbed now. Too late to change course, too late for regret. The brothers begin the psalms for the dying. Words you've recited 10,000 times now float over you as your breathing grows shallow. These same psalms you've sung for countless brothers before you. Their faces blur in your memory. So many who entered the cloister full of zeal, who grew bent and weary as you have, who disappeared into unmarked graves in the cemetery just beyond the wall. There is no family present. The mother who wept when you were taken as an oblate at age 7 never saw you again. The father whose calloused hand blessed you before the monastery gates closed has been dust for decades. You don't know if your siblings still live, if they produce nieces and nephews you'll never meet. No one from the world outside will mourn you. No one will even know. As your breathing grows more laboured, the psalms continue without interruption. Monks who may have never spoken a personal word to you in 40 years of shared meals now guide your soul with memorized verses. This is the community you chose, or that was chosen for you. Not one of intimacy, but of shared purpose. Not of comfort, but of common sacrifice. He has run the race, the abbot says, not to you, but about you, though you still breathe. He has kept the faith. Have you? Those moments of doubt you never voiced, the nights you lay awake wondering if the cold stones and endless prayers were nothing but elaborate human folly. Will these condemn you? Or was the struggle itself the point? You'll never know which brothers harboured the same doubts, which ones questioned, which ones regretted. Such things aren't spoken of within these walls. Each monk dies alone with his uncertainties as you do now. When the final breath leaves your body, there is no dramatic scene. Your brothers simply note the moment, close your eyes with practiced hands, and continue the prayers. Now for your departed soul, rather than your dying body. The transition is seamless, the ritual unbroken. Death is not an interruption in the monastery, it is part of the routine. Your body, emaciated from decades of fasting, curved from prayer, hardened from labour, is washed by brothers who will never speak of its flaws or scars. The hair shirt you wore against your skin, that private mortification that chafed and bled for years, is removed and replaced with a clean robe. In death you are granted the dignity and care often absent in life. No elaborate casket awaits you. Your body is wrapped in your robe, perhaps with a simple wooden crucifix placed in your hands. You are carried to the chapter house laid before the assembled community for one night. Brothers file past, not to grieve personally but to contemplate their own mortality. Your face, now peaceful in death, reminds each monk of his own approaching end. You serve the community even in death, as a memento mori, a reminder that every brother's time will come. The next day after prime, you are carried to the cemetery, that quiet corner of the monastery grounds where generations of anonymous brothers rest in identical graves. No family plot, no elaborate tombstone, no personal epitaph. Just the community burial ground, where uniformity in death mirrors the uniformity of monastic life. The grave is simple, dug by brother monks who paused in their gardening to create this space. The same men who work beside you in the fields or scriptorium now lower your shrouded form into the earth. Prayers are said, the same prayers repeated for every monk before you, the same that will be said for those who dig your grave when their time comes. If you were particularly learned or held an office, perhaps the abbot might speak a few words about your service. For most monks, there is no eulogy, no recounting of accomplishments. Your life's worth isn't measured in the monastery's memory of you. Your name might be added to the necrology, read once yearly on the anniversary of your death, and then only your monastic name, not the one your mother called you. A simple wooden cross marks the spot, perhaps carved by the monastery carpenter. No dates, just a name, sometimes not even that. In a few years the wood will weather, the name fade, the grass will grow, another grave will be dug nearby. Your physical presence in the monastery will disappear as completely as if you had never been there at all. And yet, the manuscripts you copied still sit in the library. The stones you helped set in the wall still stand. The prayers you added your voice to continue, spoken by new lips. The monastery endures, though you do not. This was never about you, it was always about something larger, longer lasting beyond the individual. As the brothers return to their duties, the bell calling them to the next office, as it always has, as it always will, Your absence is absorbed into the rhythm of monastic life. By nightfall, someone else sleeps in your cell, sits in your place in the choir, takes up your tools in the workshop. The machinery of monastic life cannot stop for one monk's passing. This is what you were promised. Not glory, not recognition, but dissolution. To disappear into God as completely as your body disappears into the earth. To become nothing so that something greater might be everything. Your reward isn't found in who remembers you, but in what eternal eyes might see in the soul you surrendered, day by day, year by year, until nothing of the original remained. Your life wasn't a candle, burning bright then extinguished. It was a drop of water, returning to the ocean from which it came, indistinguishable, inseparable, complete. You weren't a knight. You didn't ride into battle with banners flying or win glory on blood-soaked fields. Your name wasn't carved into castle walls or sung by troubadours in royal courts. You fought a different battle, the battle with yourself, with darkness, with oblivion. And in that silent war you were both the victor and the vanquished, the conqueror and the conquered. Your body now lies in an unmarked grave, one among dozens in the monastery cemetery, your bones indistinguishable from those who came before. The desires you fought, the doubts you harboured, the pain you endured, all have dissolved into silence. Your personal struggles, those wrestlings with temptation that kept you awake on countless nights, those moments of spiritual desolation when God seemed more absent than present, those physical ailments that bent your spine and swelled your joints, all have vanished like morning mist, leaving no trace. And yet something remains. While nobles feasted and peasants starved, while kings waged wars and merchants counted coins, you and your brothers built something that outlasted them all. In an age when most could not read, when knowledge was as fragile as parchment and as vulnerable as a candle flame in wind, you preserved what might otherwise have been lost forever. Remember those endless hours in the scriptorium, your back aching, fingers cramped, eyes straining in the dim light? Each letter you traced was an act of defiance against the darkness of ignorance and forgetting. While your contemporaries outside the walls concerned themselves with survival or wealth or power, you copied Aristotle, Augustine, Cicero. Languages that were dying, Greek, classical Latin, found refuge in your careful strokes. How many men can say they've touched the thoughts of Plato, the old master of novices once asked you? The world forgets, we remember. The world burns, we rebuild. The world tears down, we preserve. When Rome fell and barbarians swept across Europe, it was monasteries like yours that held fast to the fraying threads of civilization. Those ancient texts you laboured over, texts you may not have fully understood or even believed, they carried the accumulated wisdom of centuries. Each page you copied, each illustration you painted, each binding you stitched was an investment in a future you would never see. The monastery garden where you spent decades pulling weeds and harvesting herbs wasn't just a source of food and medicine. It was an experiment, a living laboratory where generations of monks developed agricultural knowledge, breeding hardier crops, testing new techniques that would eventually feed thousands beyond your walls. Those careful records you kept of planting times, of successes and failures, of remedies and recipes, they formed a practical wisdom passed from monastery to village, improving lives in ways the recipients never knew to thank you for. And what of those medicines you helped prepare? The healing herbs you cultivated, the poultices you mixed, the tinctures you distilled, they saved lives. When plague ravaged the countryside and others fled, your monastery remained, offering what care it could. Your brothers died serving the sick, anonymous martyrs to compassion. The medical knowledge preserved and expanded within monastery walls would form the foundation of universities centuries later. Even those hours of prayer that seemed endless, that exhausted your body and sometimes felt empty to your soul, they weren't wasted. In a violent age, your monastery stood as a testament to another way of being. When power was measured by the sword, you offered the radical alternative of the bent knee. The monastery's bells divided the day into measures of devotion, reminding all who heard them that time itself belonged to something sacred. The world thinks monks flee from life, the abbot told you once when you were young and still struggled with the confinement. But we run towards something greater. We aren't hiding, we're building a lighthouse in the darkness. That light extended beyond knowledge and healing. The monastery was often the only source of education for local children, the only provider for orphans and widows, the only refuge for the aged with no family to care for them. When famine struck, monastery granaries opened. When lords oppressed peasants, abbots sometimes stood between. Not always, not perfectly. Monasteries had their corruptions and failures, but often enough to matter. Consider, too, the beauty you helped create. Those illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and vibrant colours, the carefully copied music notation that preserved ancient chants, the church adorned with carvings and paintings, all were acts of devotion that transcended mere utility. In an age of ugliness and suffering, you created beauty. That beauty shaped souls, lifted hearts, provided glimpses of transcendence to people whose lives were often brutish and short. Even the beer and wine you brewed served a purpose beyond thirst. When water was often unsafe, monastery beverages provided disease-free hydration to travellers and locals alike. Those cheese-making techniques you perfected through generations of trial and error would spread throughout Europe, creating livelihoods and nourishing millions long after your traditions were forgotten. Your life of restriction paradoxically created freedom for others. Your rejection of comfort helped build comforts that would eventually reach beyond the privileged few. Your acceptance of personal poverty generated wealth, not of gold, but of knowledge, art, and innovation that enriched civilization itself. None of this excuses the suffering you endured, the harsh disciplines, the cold stones, the emotional deprivation, the relentless schedule. These weren't necessary for the good that monasteries produced. Many brothers broke under these burdens, their minds and bodies sacrificed to an ascetic ideal that often served hierarchy more than holiness. The monastery was as much a product of its brutal age as it was an alternative to it. And yet, something pure remained at the core, something that survived beyond the individual monk's suffering or the institution's flaws, a commitment to something beyond the immediate and material, a willingness to vanish as a person so that ideas and beauty might endure, a recognition that civilization requires sacrifice, not the bloody kind that kings and generals demand, but the daily offering of one life poured out like water on dry ground, absorbed without trace but still giving life. While knights fought for glory that faded within generations, you fought for a legacy that would continue without your name attached. The knight's armour rusts in forgotten tombs, but the knowledge you preserve still shapes minds. The Lord's castle crumbles to ruins, but the spiritual questions you wrestled with still haunt human hearts. The king's decree yellows and fades, but the music you transcribed still rises in sacred spaces. You disappeared completely, as all monks do. Your individuality dissolved first into the community, then into death. Your remains eventually dust without marker or memory. Your personal story ended in that unmarked grave, but the story you helped write continues in libraries and gardens, in universities and hospitals, in the quiet persistence of beauty and knowledge through humanity's darkest chapters. This was never about you. That was the point. You succeeded by disappearing. While nobility built monuments to ensure they wouldn't be forgotten, you embraced being forgotten so that something greater would be remembered. Your individual candle was consumed, but the light continues. That was always the paradox at the heart of your vocation. To die so that others might live, to empty yourself so that something greater might find space to grow. While kings changed crowns and knights fought for glory, you stood by the hearth of faith, keeping civilization's flame from going out. You were the keeper of books, the copier of knowledge, the preserver of beauty, the silent guardian of a world sinking into darkness. And though your name has disappeared from human memory, though your grave bears no marker, though your personal struggles and triumphs vanished with your last breath, something of your life's work continues, unbroken to this very day. The life of a medieval monk wasn't just a story of suffering, it was a story of endurance, of faith, and of a different kind of heroism, not by sword but by silent perseverance. As we've walked through the shadows of those cold stone cloisters, we've glimpsed a world foreign to modern sensibilities yet strangely familiar in its human struggles. The monk's journey from child oblate to bent elder, from struggling novice to anonymous grave, reveals something profound about what humans are capable of enduring in service to what they believe. Those desires you fought against in inhabitants, those doubts that plagued your midnight prayers, that broken body that finally returned to the earth unmarked and unmourned, all were part of a greater tapestry, a pattern you could never fully see from within the tight confines of your existence. We live in an age of comfort now, an age that views discomfort as something to be eliminated rather than embraced. We chase recognition, build personal brands, attach our names to everything we create. The idea of dissolving into anonymity, of labouring without credit, of restricting pleasure deliberately, these concepts seem almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. We might call them unhealthy, even abusive. And yet there is something here worth contemplating in our age of constant noise and self-promotion. The monks who copied manuscripts by hand, letter by letter, creating works of breathtaking beauty without signing their names, they understood something about ego that we struggle to grasp. The brothers who work collectively to preserve knowledge, advance agriculture, create music and tend the sick without seeking personal glory, they embodied a communal spirit that our individualistic age both yearns for and resists. This isn't to romanticize the harshness. The cold was real. The hunger was real. The loneliness and doubt and physical pain were all real. Many monks broke under these burdens, their minds or bodies giving way beneath pressures no human should have to bear. The system could be cruel, the hierarchy oppressive, the mortification excessive. But within that flawed human institution, something remarkable happened. Civilization survived when it might otherwise have perished. While kingdoms rose and fell, while plagues swept through populations, while armies clashed and cities burned, the monasteries endured. Those carefully copied books, those preserved techniques, those agricultural innovations, those medical advances, they bridged the gap between ancient wisdom and the Renaissance to come. Without the monastic tradition, our modern world might look vastly different. Our connection to antiquity severed, our intellectual heritage fragmented beyond recovery. Perhaps the most profound paradox of the monk's life was this. By embracing limitations, they created possibility. By accepting confinement within walls, they helped ensure that human thought would not be confined. By living within strict rules, they preserved the freedom of ideas. By saying no to themselves in countless small ways, they said yes to a future they would never see. As you lay in that unmarked grave, your individual story complete, you couldn't know how the seeds you planted would grow. You couldn't imagine universities arising from monastic schools, or hospitals developing from monastery infirmaries, or great libraries evolving from scriptoria, where you strained your eyes copying texts whose language you sometimes barely understood. You couldn't foresee how the music notation you carefully preserved would evolve into symphonies, or how the brewing techniques you refined would become industries, or how the medicinal herbs you cultivated would lead to modern pharmacology. You weren't celebrated in epic poems, no castles bear your name, no dynasties inherit your legacy. But each book you copied, each hymn you sang, each hour of prayer in darkness, all were small pieces in a greater picture. A picture of faith, of human spirit's persistence, and of finding meaning even in the greatest sacrifices. Perhaps that's the final lesson we might take from your forgotten life. That meaning doesn't always wear the face we expect. It doesn't always announce itself with fanfare or come wrapped in comfort and recognition. Sometimes meaning hides in repetition, in limitation, in the daily choice to continue when everything within you wants to stop. Sometimes the most significant lives are the ones that disappear most completely into their purpose. The monastery walls still stand in places, weathered by centuries but enduring. The bells still ring in towers, calling not just to prayer but to remembrance. And in libraries around the world, your handiwork still exists, those illuminated pages where you poured your life out one careful letter at a time. Your name is absent, but your legacy remains. In the quiet places between our noisy striving, in the small sacrifices we make without announcement, in the work we do that bears no signature, there, perhaps, we touch something of what you knew. Not the harsh extremes of your denial, but the core insight that sometimes we find ourselves most fully by letting go of ourselves most completely. As the darkness gathers and we prepare for sleep, may we carry with us not just sympathy for your hardships, but respect for your endurance. May the silence between these words echo with something of the silence you embraced, not empty, but full of unspoken possibility. And may we remember that every age has its own form of heroism, its own way of preserving what matters against the entropy that would erase it all. Rest well, nameless brother. Your watch is ended. Ended. Ours continues.